Hey everyone, Temporal here, and for this session we are going to be reviewing a guide. We see the guides over here. We'll be taking a look at it. Let's first get our background for this guide. It is a guide to Brawl, Dive, and Spam compositions. A link to document. A friend of mine is on a collegiate team and asked if I could write out a guide for his team on different compositions and the interactions between them. This is the first time I've done something like this, but I figured it would be helpful to anyone in a competitive team environment. I took most of these notes based off Thor's coaching series, though I plan to expand on this doc as I learn more. Have fun learning to play Dive. Okay, so they're new to this. They are sourcing Thor here for some of it, and Thor has done very good work, but they are new to this, so maybe we'll be a little gentle. We probably won't, but we are going to go ahead and review their guide here, and there we go. Okay, so Overwatch macro composition guide. There's nothing too interesting here comment-wise, guys, other than, hey, a link to Thor's work and people saying Thor's work is good. Okay, so here we are. We're taking a look at this. GameBuster asks, professionally reviewed. At what point are you a professional on reviewing gameplay or guides? Oh, I saw this is a talk, by the way. Wanted to see your feedback. Cool. I mean, I'm a professional at this because I professionally coached these compositions in contenders, in collegiate. Like I've been paid to coach this. I've coached what everyone considers to be professionals. Like this is I professionally coached, so professionally reviewed by a professional coach, however you want to consider it. And now I've just listed my credentials. I don't really believe in credentialism, but that's okay. We'll go through this. Okay, so Overwatch macro composition guide. Brawl, dive, spam, communication, fight structure, rock, paper, scissors compositions, hybrid compositions, and tempo. So those are the concepts that we're going to be covering. Seems reasonable. I think the most interesting thing will probably be these. But these are all very interesting concepts as well. These are sort of the main ways to play the game, with hybrid compositions being mixes of these. Let's see what's here. Your eyes. I mean, I don't know how to make this dark mode, so we're just going to have to deal. Sorry. Okay, so Brawl. Ryan, Zarya, sometimes Diva, Reaper, Sim, May, sometimes Junkrat, Lucio, Bap, Moira. So we've decided that those are the Brawl heroes. It really depends on how you want to think about it. They're the heroes that get used in a composition called that we refer to as Brawl. Brawl being a way to play the game. I object a little bit to sort of doing it like that because Lucio is a hero that is always used in Brawl because he always makes heroes who have limited range but good strong short range fighting power better because he gives them speed, something that they desperately want. But he himself isn't really a brawler. He's got a ranged weapon, he's got high mobility, he's a dive hero, he's a poke dive hero, like however you want to think about that. So I object a little bit to that, but that's okay. And then similar thing with, hey, if we're going to include Lucio, why are we not including a McCree? Well, McCree's a poke Brawl hybrid. Yeah, he is, but Lucio isn't really a Brawl hero either. He just makes Brawl significantly better. He's a hero that's used in Brawl, and so is McCree. Anyway, same thing. Like, and we could go, okay, why isn't Brig in here? Brig is a brawler. Anyway, doesn't matter. I'm being nitpicky. These are reasonable heroes to list here for Brawl. I just noticed that they went heavily on the close range, and then they objected a little even themselves to the Junkrat, who's a little longer range heroes, when they were describing Brawl. But then included Lucio. Doesn't matter. Pros. Fast movement horizontally. Well, that's strictly because of Lucio. Zarya does not have particularly fast movement horizontally. Diva can go horizontal or vertical. Reaper can teleport. Sim can teleport. Mei doesn't move particularly fast horizontally. Bap moves vertically. Moira moves horizontally. Yeah, so really only because of Lucio that they have that. Able to sustain fights. Yes, Brawl does have very good mid-fight sustain. It is better at that than most comps. That is a reasonable signature of Brawl. I'm good with that. Cons. Little map control. Yep. Less effective as fight goes on. Wants to win fight within first cooldowns. Lucio boost to mortality field, Mei wall, etc. No. No, this is probably going to have to be my first objection. Everyone gets less effective as the fight goes on. But this becomes a what am I balancing it against sort of thing. Like if I go, okay, well here's my Brawl comp, and it has Reinhardt, and it has Mei, and it has Lucio, and it has Bap, and it goes and uses its lamp, it uses its ice wall, it uses its immortality field. Yep, yep, it's weaker after all of those things are out. But you know what? It's still a heck of a lot stronger than the dive comp with their Winston, Genji. I'll put Zen here. Zen and Diva. When, okay, you don't have dash, you don't have bubble or jump pack, you don't have boosters. This comp is weaker than this comp. I only listed 4 heroes on each side, but my point is Dive is actually more heavily tied to it needs to get something done during its cooldown cycle than Brawl does. Brawl is actually perfectly happy to rotate through its cooldowns and go, okay, we went ahead and used our wall. Then you get to put some trouble on us, so we had to sustain, and we sustained with a bunch of DM and boosters. And then we were still in trouble, so we sustained with lamp. And we made a mistake, so we sustained with amp. Like, okay, we do all those things, and now we're still pretty good at fighting. Like, we struggle to catch things, yes, but if we're in the mid fight, we're pretty good at this fight going on. Like, we have lots of Rhine Shield, we have a hammer that does a lot of damage. We do much more damage than these guys do, the Genjis, the Winstons. Like, no, we do much more damage than they do. We're perfectly powerful. This dive comp is way more dependent on, hey, we get the value. Like the original concept of dive and how people thought about it was, okay, as my Winston lands on someone, my Genji dashes through them, my Tracer double blinks in and unloads her one clip. And the Discord Orb is on them, and that gets the elimination, and it combines for enough damage to take someone down. That was the idea. We land all of our cooldowns together, and if we don't get that, we need to reset. We need to get out. We need to hide behind corners. We need to use Lucio's speed amp to run away because we just used our movement abilities to get in, so that we can then set up for another dive. Because if we don't get him with the dive, we're not going to get him. That would have been the original concept of dive. Now dive's played a little more in a sustain way, a little more in a, hey, let's battle for the lanes. That's actually always been important, but like a little bit more in a sustained way if we only commit when we're really sure we're going to get the elimination. But it's still just that. Dive is more tied to its cooldown power than Brawl is. Brawl heroes are built with more muscle, with more power outside of their cooldown cycle, really with more power to them than dive heroes are, just as an example. Poke heroes, if they're at their range, are quite effective, but if they're forced in a mid-fight, they're forced into a brawl phase, they're also going to be, I mean, cooldown or no cooldown, they're just going to go down. So I'm again, we're on really the first page here, I guess technically page 2, and I'm definitely objecting to this less effective as fight goes on. Want to win within first few cooldowns. He's thinking more of a rush strategy. He's thinking more of like a, well, we'll just run them down and we'll be successful or we'll fail. He's not actually thinking about Brawl as a concept. Like one way to play Brawl, and this was the way that Goats was played early, is okay, we're just going to run it down mid at the enemy. We're just going to run at them. We're going to use all of our cooldowns to sustain as best we can, and we're going to try to get an elimination, chain it into another, and we're good. That's a way to play it. But it's not actually the best way to play it or the only way to play it. This is much more how Six-Man or Talon Dive is played these days. It's how Goats was originally played, like I said. You can still play Brawl like this at times. It's sort of like the, okay, well, how good is your plan going to survive? How good is this going to work? But this loses to a Brawl team that knows how to take angles, that knows how to handle your aggression, how to break what I would call bad aggression here. Go, okay, well, you just try to run at us and we slip a Mei wall between you. You just try to run at us and we send our Diva booster through you to sort of boop you away to break your aggression for a moment. You try to run at us and we've properly taken angles, so our Diva's over here, our Reinhardt's here, who's yours running at, our Bap is further back, who you're running at, but you can't really get on him because there's appropriate space between him and our Reinhardt, and our McCree is over here. So as you try to just run at our Reinhardt and push him back and get take him down and then get to the BAP, the McCree picks people out of your back line. Or we can do this with a Mei if we strictly want to be using Brawl heroes. She can do it. Like, not as well as McCree, but she can do it. So, like, or our Diva Lucio, again, our Lucio goes in, boops you guys out to break your aggression. Our Diva boops you guys out to break your aggression. Like, this is bad aggression if you don't set it up well. It'll work against lower level teams, but we've mostly evolved past that, and mostly the peel present isn't strong enough to just let you run through like this anymore. There is no dark mode for the web version of Docs deal. I'm sorry, Gamebuster. Okay. So, hey, Carolina. Yeah, this is the type of thing I like to review. So good guess that I'd be here eventually. Okay, so fast moving horizontally, able to sustain fights. So this is a little weird that we talk about able to sustain fights, and then we also say cons less effective as the fight goes on, wants to win within the first few cooldowns. So I'm a little surprised to see this in the pros and the cons because those are kind of the same thing that's going on there. That's not amazing. That's a little weird. Clearly, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding here. And we can already see what that misunderstanding is, where they're thinking about playing Brawl in what's sometimes called a rush style or a just like go fast, go first, push hard type style rather than a slower play for angles and you're just going to grind out a win style. And the grind out a win style angles are king. Okay, that said, Brawl is the place where angles are least king. I would agree. Okay, so now we're into what I think is the how to play it, because our cons had the indentation. Now we have stick together, and that's in all caps lock. And again, that's telling me that no, we're not thinking about playing Brawl in the way that you have to play it in the mirror, where you start taking your angles and pressuring, and you get your McCree on the off angle to push them, or as they push you, you can break their aggression. Like, if you have angles against someone, if they have a Reinhardt shield and they're pushing, and you're out here with your Zarya on an angle, with your Reinhardt right here, with your Mei on an angle, it's really hard. When their Reinhardt walks forward, he gets Frozen Beam. When he walks forward, he gets zapped. If you go, oh, but we have a shield, we'll shoot at your Zarya with our Zarya from behind our Rein shield, well, their Zarya's going to get more energy, and then, yeah, she's going to go back to her Reinhardt, but she's actually in a better situation. She'll have done more work to your team. She'll have put more pressure on your team. She'll have been able to shoot around your Rein shield and get more done before she's forced back. And then once she sustains up a little bit, she'll go back out on the angle. So I totally get it. There's this belief that, like, oh no, the Lucio auras, the Moira heals, the BAP AoE heals, maybe Inspire back in that day, it's all worth a ton. And, these auras are just worth a ton. They're okay. They're pretty good. Don't get me wrong. But actually having the angles with your people lets you do more, because if the team just tries to run it in, their tools, their Rein shields, their defense matrices, all those things, their crosshairs become okay, well, we can't clearly pick who we want to shoot at. We're pushing into a concave where we get shot in all directions. It's called a defensive concave for a reason. So again, it can work against teams that don't know what they're doing. It can work if a team spreads out too much and can't adequately protect their Reinhardt. It's not the end-all be-all way to play the game. Okay, cool. Use cooldowns defensively. Again, like, I don't mind using cooldowns defensively in some situations, but if I'm playing Brawl v Brawl, I don't want to use my Mei wall defensively. I want to use my Mei wall offensively. That could be used as a defensive tool. Against poke comps, I might use it as a defensive tool, but against another Brawl comp, I want to use my wall as a offensive cooldown. Lamp frequently will be used defensively, but sometimes will be used offensively. If we recognize in our Brawl v Brawl mirror that we have a cooldown advantage, we're going to push aggressively because we have our cooldowns and they don't. And we might even do so if we're low health. And if we're going to do so while we're low health, we're just going to lamp, that sort of thing. So I object to that and that. And I'd also object to it in a Brawl versus Poke or Brawl versus Poke Dive hybrid situation where people, I think what he's thinking is this idea of like, oh, I need to sustain on the point, or maybe she, I need to sustain on the point with point control as a Brawl comp, because that is one way that Brawl can win the game. They can play for objective control rather than map control. They don't play map control very well, so they have to play for either forcing fights, and the best way to force fights is to use the objective. And they can go, oh, well, we'll just sustain on the fight, and we'll lamp on the fight, and we'll ice wall on the fight, and we'll ice block on the fight, and we'll defense matrix in one direction, and we'll shield in another, and we'll amp to sustain on the fight, and we'll biotic regeneration on the point, and we'll do all these things to sustain, and we'll just get 60, 80, 90, 40% out of it, and it'll be good, and that's fine. And that can kind of work, but that's generally like the threat of doing this is actually what you use to be able to run down your opponents. You go, we have pretty good resources to sustain on or behind point after we've captured it, to make the opponents come in, to make the opponents walk onto the point, to make the opponents circle to places, try to go around to get to places where they can get sight lines on you, where they can shoot at you, where they can do that. You try to use as much cover as possible to lure them in, and then you were actually pretty safe while you were using cover on the point, near the point, that sort of thing with control. You might have had to spend some of your resources to get the actual cap, but after you've got the cap, you hang out near the point and you use some resources lightly to keep the point if they put someone on the point. If they don't put anyone on the point, you don't have to spend any resources. So what you actually do is you conserve your resources while you're in a closed space. While you're relatively protected, while you have lots of hard cover around you, you conserve your space, your resources. And then you use your resources. You go, hey, we're going to use speed amp to run on this diva that's trying to touch point to put pressure on us. We're going to use our teleporter to sim TP onto the Zen that's tried to open an angle on us with a long distance, but tried to open an angle on us to poke us back here to make our cover no good. No, we're going to sim TP to them, and then we're going to Mei wall behind them to trap them, and we're going to speed amp, and we're going to take out that Zen, and then we're going to go back to cover type thing. And while we do this, we might have our diva use her boosters to zone out a pharmacy, to zone out an echo, to zone out a Hanzo. Well, that was a huge resource investment. We just used a teleporter, a Mei wall, diva boosters, DM, a bunch of our mech's health, Lucio's amp. Maybe we use our lamp if we have to, and I'm perfectly happy with a Brawl team using those resources to go get the elimination, and then either get out safely or very quickly get another elimination, because they were able to conserve their resources while they were in closed space near the point, or if the point had adequate cover on the point. So like, they actually frequently against poke comps or poke dive comps are very much not using their cooldowns defensively. They can threaten using their points defensively. They can do a we're just going to sustain on the point as best we can thing, but they will eventually lose that. One of the better ways to play it is actually to use these resources to threaten people. And I just did the Zen here. But like I said, you can also push the diva, and even if you can't eliminate her, you can make her leave. Oh, that was more of an erase than I wanted. You can make the diva leave that say touched point. She's going to lose health on her way out. You're going to shoot her, you're going to hit her, you're going to maybe try and freeze her, icicle her, shoot her with McCree shots, try to run her down with your Lucio speed until she leaves point, maybe even chase her a little bit further, and then go right back to your cover. And then, okay, well, you accomplished something. You spent resources while you were out here. You spent health, you spent DM, maybe you spent Mei wall to try to block someone else out while you were chasing the diva so that they couldn't hurt you on that angle, because you put yourself more in the open. Great to try to maybe force the elimination if you could get it, but even if you just did 400 damage to her, 300 damage to her, and made her use boosters, you can now go back to relative safety, and they have one less threat to try to force angles onto you with to do damage, which means you don't have to spend very many resources while you are back here recovering resources again, and the point percentage is once again ticking up. 65, 66, 67, 68, that sort of thing. Like, that's actually more how this works. You spend resources to go chase people out, to try to go make plays on people. You conserve resources when you have the point and they're not threatening the point. You obviously have to spend some resources to get the point in the first place, yes. Okay, so now we will move on to the next piece here. Rotate onto enemy, conserving resources. Yeah, if you have closed space that you can rotate through onto enemies, that is effective. If you can rotate onto enemies through a closed space, you know what? Let me get an example because I've tried to do a few of these now. Stat Banana, that'll work. And let's get Lijiang Tower will be a good example for this. For those of you who are just listening, I apologize, but I think this one is going to require some visual examples. I'm trying to talk through what I'm doing, and I hope you can follow along, but I think visual examples upgrade the value of this one enough that I'm going to do it. So what I was talking about here is you do things like go, hey, we're the defending Brawl team. We're hiding out behind Point Iron Night Market because that gives us relatively good cover. The opposing Zen might sort of try to be over here trying to find an angle. We might make a TP play on them, that sort of thing. Or the opposing team tries to go touch point with perhaps a diva, and then we make our play to go push them out. We do some damage to them, we make them leave. Maybe we threw up a Mei wall in a different direction to block out the Zen while we were chasing the diva, for example, to block out the Hanzo while we were chasing the diva, to make the Tracer take a longer rotation while we were chasing the diva. And then once that's happened, once that diva has left, she can't really come back in. She's not meaningful, so we go back by point. We have undone her trying to cap the point, and now it's not really possible to take us down again because even if, while we're down on resources, say a Echo and Tracer try to come after us, we're not really going to lose to that Echo and Tracer that are trying to fight us out of line of sight of their Zen and their Diva. Even if we don't have our lamp, don't have our wall, don't have full matrix, we're going to be okay against those things. Okay, so back to this. Rotate onto enemies conserving resources. So that can be valid. You can go, hey, if the opponent's Zen is set up back here because they realize setting up on point would be foolish and they have point control, you can absolutely go, I cannot just run through to try to get on their Zen. That's too dangerous. Running to point is also what they want me to do. They will farm me on the way in. So I'm going to rotate. I'm going to rotate through these more closed spaces to try to get close to their Zen, and then I have to go through the least amount of open space to try to eliminate their Zen. Now, this isn't actually going to work. What's going to happen is you're going to rotate like this. The Zen is going to realize what you're doing, and he's going to rotate away. But him rotating away still causes you to go, okay, well, now he doesn't have a good sight line on you, and so now you can rotate through this open space to point more cleanly. And also this Zen still isn't in a great spot because now, oh shoot, there's nowhere for him to go as you perhaps speed amped to here and then make your TP play to here to go after him or TP play here to go after him type thing. So rotations through closed spaces are good. What you'll also find is good is fake rotations, where you start to come out of a closed space, start to walk into what would be a kill box for a poke team, a dive team, that sort of thing. Less a poke team, more a poke dive team or a dive team. Walk out into their kill box and then immediately retreat as they trigger their dive. As they trigger their, okay, now we're going to hit you from multiple different directions. Well, we're just immediately going to back out. And then, oh shoot, now you guys are stuck without cooldowns, and we're going to walk into you. And maybe we'll throw up a Mei wall to keep your Zen out. Maybe we won't. I don't really care. The truth is, this dive team is a lot more vulnerable when they pull the trigger and use their cooldowns than the Brawl team is. Really, the Brawl team doesn't have to spend very much. If they do spend a little bit, though, that's fine. Like if they go, no, we'll walk out here, we'll immediately ice wall, we'll walk out here, we'll immediately lamp and back out, and we're perfectly happy to push back out without our lamp into you because you just all spent your cooldowns and you need them more than we do. That sort of thing. In a brawl, in a poke phase, the brawl team needs them more to rotate through open space than the poke team needs them, but that's a little bit different. Okay. Okay. Win conditions. Force mid fights. I don't know if I'd call that. Yeah, okay. Okay. They're good in the brawl, and mid fight is being used as the same term as brawl here, so I'm good with that. Force enemies to come to you or rotate onto them. Abilities to reduce incoming damage. Yep, those are good. Your abilities aren't necessarily to reduce incoming damage. They're more to make sure that you get to the opponents. You could say, yeah, you can call them to reduce incoming damage. I mean, a Mei wall to stop someone from retreating isn't really reducing incoming damage, but it's causing you to get the elim faster, which is reducing incoming damage, and you can also use it more directly to reduce incoming damage. Maywall to make the Tracer take a much longer flank while you walk across type thing. Like, yeah, that's okay. Maywall to block out a McCree was you rotate onto a Diva, all that. Sure, sure. Fortify position with least angles close to point. Right. You want objective control and you want a closed space. And when I talk about a closed space, I'm generally talking about indoors. But what we're really talking about is a place where it's very hard to get multiple angles on you. You have cover against as many directions as possible. And preferably, if they are going to get an angle on you, they have to get close to you to do it. Brawl plays as one unit. Trust your teammates. Everything play like no, no. So this is again back to this stick together thing where the answer is not really. So if I'm playing against a pokey team, a dive team, whatever, the real way that I would play this, if we were doing this, is hey, let's get a couple more heroes here, fine, and we would actually take small off angles to poke at this team as this team is far away, and then if we get into any trouble, we go behind hard cover. And then as this team gets closer to us, we stack together more. As the team gets closer to us, we stack together more because that allows us to go, okay, now we don't want to be vulnerable to a dive. As this team gets closer to being set up, we stack more so that we can make plays better, maybe with our sim TPs, maybe with our amp speed so that we all get caught, or just so that we have good target focus for taking down the target. Like, yes, as a non-brawl team gets closer to us, we're going to stack more. But the truth is, if we're actually willing to take any sort of poke phase against the opponents, we are still going to angle a little bit. And as we get closer to the fight starting, we're going to stack a little bit tighter to play into our win condition, to play into some of the things that we can do better than them, to make it harder to, if you dive us and we're all stacked together, the Mei protects the McCree protects the Mei, the BAP protects the team, the Diva protects the BAP, all those sorts of things. So being a little closer can be good. As you get closer to the fight starting, especially against a team that's trying to dive you, trying to surround you, but you don't strictly need to do that during the poke phase. That said, that's more advanced. If you did play Brawl into poke strictly as we're just going to stack tight and we're never going to take a poke phase, we're always going to use cover to make you move closer, that wouldn't be the end of the world as a way to play it. As you get higher, you understand this other thing, how to actually make your poke phase work, make your poke phase sort of relevant. Like, okay, angles are a big buff to poking, so if we're going to take any sort of poke with you, which there's situations where we might, maybe you're missing someone, maybe we have McCree's, High Noon, and Window available, so we're actually the better poke team right now. There's times that you do that, but as they get closer, you'd stack tighter for your Brawl here. And then the most important concept of macro Overwatch is, this is from chat, whose fault is it we are losing? How can we make them feel ashamed of themselves? Yes. No, don't think like that. And then we all go down to Diva Pop together. I see. Okay. So I don't fully agree with this one single unit thing, but I actually think it's a reasonable place to start. Like, it's one of those few cases where it's not that you want to train to have it wrong and then break it. It's that I would rather the team stacks too much when playing Brawl versus Dive or Brawl versus Poke than, as long as my Diva or Tracer, if I work one in there freelance, then get lost with the whoops, we're not swapping from our poke phase to our tighter Brawl phase quickly enough, and we're too spread out when it starts, because you won't be able to make enough plays if you're too spread out when it starts. So the more important thing is the stacking, but you do actually do both. Calls. Okay, so now we're getting into some of the calls. Attack into the enemy, trust the call, they see an advantage, Reaper in position, etc. Turn, peel for backline, help supports. Stabilize, play defensively, wait for CDs. Stack on X, group on teammate, ensure they stay alive. Yeah, those are reasonably good calls. I'd probably replace in with commit, and I'd probably replace turn with peel. Stabilize is a reasonable call. Wait for CDs. You're generally waiting for CDs, or you're waiting to sort of let your team heal back up. Stabilize generally makes sense. It can make sense when, hey, you it can make sense in a few situations, one of which would be you got an elimination. You took down their Reinhardt, for example, in a mirror, and now you go, hey, we took down their Reinhardt, but our Reinhardt is weak. Let's spend our Reinhardt shield while we heal him back up, and then we'll push again, as his shield breaks or as we get him healed back up, whatever, and we'll actually win our 6v5 at that point. Stabilize also obviously happens in other situations, but usually it's a let's try to recover type situation. Yes. Stack on X. Stack on X is useful because it forces everyone onto your Ryan, onto your Brig, onto your Zarya, preferably onto someone with relatively short range, and it sort of replaces target calls. It's useful for keeping you tight in that brawl phase so you can do things like all run on someone with that Lucio speed, all be there through that TP instantly that gets dropped on top of you. It's also good because your Brig, your Reinhardt don't have very much range, and anything that you're going to take down in a Brawl v Brawl, for example, is almost certainly going to be someone that your Reinhardt can be on, because he's a major source of your damage, so you don't want to be attacking a ton of targets that he can't get on in some of that stuff. Similar stuff when you're trying to push out a diva, push out this, like you can make these plays better in some ways when you're tighter. That said, we've really evolved to a place where in Brawl v Brawl you actually don't stack very much because you recognize that the angles are better, the defensive concave is better. This can still be useful when playing these stat calls into non-brawl comps, because you don't want to spread out a bunch against dive, for example, when dive is close and ready to pull the trigger, because isolated people are diveable. We don't particularly like that. Unless you are properly applying map control to not let them get to places where they can stage a dive well. But again, that's not something Brawl is particularly good at. Brawl surrenders map control in a lot of ways. Not to itself, but to dive comps. Okay. Okay, enabler ults. Goal is to force abilities out of enemy. No preparation. Follow-up plan to push advantage. Goal is to force abilities out of enemies. No preparation. Follow-up plan to push advantage. Diva, Moira, Lucio. I'm going to need more details on what you mean. Like, I'll read it one more time. Our category is enabler ults. And then our bullets, our goal is to force abilities out of enemies. No preparation. Follow-up plan to push advantage. Diva, Moira, Lucio. So we're saying Diva, Moira, and Lucio have enabler ults? Do we need a follow-up plan to push the advantage? Do we do these without preparation? I'm not totally sure what we're saying here. I'm not hugely in love with the concept of enabler ults versus finisher ults. Like, I do conceptually know what they are because I do know coaches that use them. The concept that we're effectively getting into here, I'll read finisher ults and then I'll go over it. Finisher ults, goal is to win the fight, needs preparation to ensure success, force cooldowns like Matrix, Bubble, etc., specific positioning, Maze, Zarya, Reaper. No, you need those cooldowns to already have been forced for your finisher ults to work. The idea is that your enabler ults are ults that you're going to use early in the fight. You use your enabler ults to get resources out of the opponents, and then you use your finisher ult to actually win the fight. The concept would be, hey, it's really, really hard to get eliminations with High Noon, so what you do is you go, let's use High Noon to force the enemy team to use Defense Matrix, Lamp, Rhine Shield, Maywall, things like that. Let's try and get a bunch of cooldowns out of them. And now that they have a bunch of cooldowns out of them, we can either beat them with our cooldown advantage, or we can beat them with a second ult that we'll use as a finisher ult, like Blizzard. That's the idea of what's going on there. I'm not in love with the concept because if we think about something like Blizzard as a finisher ult, well, Blizzard works as a finisher ult because it doesn't work very well when the enemy team has lots of defense matrix left, when the enemy team has their amp speed left, it doesn't work very well. Well, okay, cool. High Noon works just fine if the opponents don't have any resources left either. If their Lucio's already in spawn, so they don't have speed, and they don't have their Maywall, and their Rhine Shield is broken, and they don't have DM, it's not that hard to get eliminations with High Noon either. Now, I get what they're saying. High Noon is a worse ult than Blizzard, so they like spending it in this way of, let's spend this to get our resource advantage to then fight and win, or to then spend a second ult and win. Like, yes, I do understand it, and there are ults that work better as finisher ults. Shatter would be a good example of an ult that works better as a finisher finisher ult than as an early ult in a fight. Yes, you can just flatten the whole team with Shatter, but Shatter is much, much more reliable, and you'll consistently get better value over the course of a match if you're using it a little later in fights. Not like, oh, we're a 5v2, let's Shatter the 2, but a little bit later in fights after stuff has been spent, whereas some of your other ults you're looking to use a little earlier, or you're willing to use a little earlier as the thing. So, like, I understand what the concept is. I don't love the concept as a way because I really think too many ults are too flexible, and it's become a little arbitrary with some things like High Noon and Blizzard as I went over there. I instead advise most teams to just use their High Noon differently. If you use your High Noon at an off angle, it's going to be pretty powerful. If you use it at an off angle while your tanks are fighting, it's going to be pretty powerful. If you use it at the same time as window and they're coming from two different angles, one of those ults is going to get elimination. So like you guys can see I don't hugely buy into that. I know it's being referred to here. I don't think this guide explained it terribly well. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Who makes all those calls? So that would be in reference to the calls. It's going to depend on your specific players. The reality is, while I might go, yes, Reinhardt is the best person to make this call, or Lucio is the best person to make this call, that's not totally real, because while that might be in theory the best, you're going to use the players that you have. If you have a super vocal off tank, great, they're going to make the call. If you have a super quiet Mei, I might want my Mei to be doing target calling because they have a little bit of a range limitation issue. And they also do a huge amount of enabling. If they freeze someone, you want people on that target. So I might want my Mei doing my target calling, but they're just not vocal, and my Reinhardt is. So my Reinhardt's going to do it. Or I might want my main tank doing my rotation planning, but my main tank is quiet. They're very good at the other aspects of main tank, but they're quiet. So my off tank is going to do it. You work with the players you have. So your fight call, your mid-fight caller is going to make these. This isn't fight planning stuff. This is mid-fight stuff. The in, the turn, the stabilize, and the stack on X. Those are target calls, and you should probably have 1 to 2 target callers on most teams. Okay. Temporal effect. When you watch Temporal's video, you see all the mistakes your teammates make, and you wish you could clone yourself 5 times to play the other roles. Real temporal effect. Then Temporal reviews you and go, "Wait, I'm not actually better than my teammates. I just thought I was. Like, I understand all this stuff a lot better. I really wish I could play with them, but I'm making mistakes too. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here." I hear you. I hear you. No other chat. If you're playing, say, Ryan Diva, Reaper, Doom, Moira, Lucio, the least pokey comp I could think of, would you ever take angles against poke, or would that basically be Brawl or nothing? Ryan Diva, Reaper, Doom, Moira. You might still set up like a defensive concave around a choke, so you'd have angles in that sense, because hey, they do still need to push through at some point, and if your choke gives you cover against them, no problem. Yeah, you could do that, but you're not gonna like poke through the choke at different angles and actually engage in any sort of ranged fight with them. No, you're gonna rely completely on rotations to move them around, or objective pressure to force them to come close to you where you can run them down. Correct. That's a good one, James. I can't read it though. Uh, they're making fun of the fact that I avoid certain words because the algorithms and such don't like them, and I substitute a limb and such. It's great. It's great. It's why you should be part of the community so you can see this chat, all that stuff. Okay, cool. Okay. Temporal, what is the actual difference between shot calls and target calls? I thought those calls were shot calls. Shot calling is a broad concept on comms that includes multiple different comm roles. So an actual comm role breakup, I don't want to go too hard into this because it's a big tangent, but what we're getting into is we could think of 3 main comm roles. We could think of fight planning, we could think of ult tracking, and we could think of fight calling. Generally, these three roles will be split between two people. You might have your ult tracker use their ult tracking knowledge to then plan the fight because they really had more awareness of the ults the whole time. Or you might go, my ult tracker is independent, and then say your main say your main support did your ult tracking and did your fight planning based off that ult tracking, and then your fight caller, let's say your main tank, went, oh hey, I've now been given a plan. I'm now going to call for us to execute the plan. I'm going to do the rotations. I'm going to do the target calling. I'm going to adjust on the fly what we're doing. And while we're doing it, I'm in charge. Great. That's a possibility. You could also go, hey, my ult tracker takes all their mental space to ult track and play the game. So the ult track happened, and then I'm going to have someone ult tracking happened, and then someone is going to fight plan, and maybe that same person, because it's their plan, is also going to call the fight. And the fight calling, again, would be the rotations, the target calling, the mid-fight adjustments to, like, oh, that sort of thing. And again, this fight calling could get split between two people. We could have, like, a target caller versus a rotation caller. That's weird. I don't like it. We could, though it will sometimes happen, and it's not wrong in all the cases where it does happen. Again, you use the players that you actually have. You use the strengths that they actually have. You're not going to change someone's personality, for example, very quickly. You could have a situation where, hey, we have our fight caller be whoever has the decisive winning ult that we're planning to win the fight with, because they're going to call the fight best to enable their ult, best to enable the win condition that they're setting up. You could do it, you more frequently would do it, where, hey, it's going to be someone like your Reinhardt, or maybe your Reinhardt's doing it, but he doesn't actually do the target calling because it doesn't make sense, or it makes sense for him to do the target calling because he's on Reinhardt, but it then doesn't make sense when you're running a Zen ball comp because he can't really call the fight when he's on ball because he's off doing other things. So now your off tank needs to call it, or your flex support needs to call it. Like, this stuff is somewhat flexible. Okay. So shot calling would sort of refer to all those things, sort of. Whereas target calling is a specific aspect of shot calling, if you want to think of them like that. Other people might say shot calling is specifically the fight planning aspect. Up to you. Okay, continuing through the guide here, because I got distracted by chat. That'll happen sometimes. Okay. Now we're moving on to dive. We are moving on to dive. So, dive. As examples, we've been given Winston, D.Va, Zarya, Tracer, Genji, Sombra, Zen, Brig, Mercy. Where's Hammond? I'm sad. We included Zen, Brig, Mercy, but we didn't include Hammond. We also didn't include Anna, but we included Winston? I don't think so. I don't... Winston's a tough sell these days without Anna. I get it. Some of this is based on Thor's composition, Thor's guide, and Thor's guide is older at this point. But you really don't see Winston run much without big heals. Anna or Moira for the 6-man, which is a Brawl Dive hybrid. Okay, so pros. High burst damage. Yep. Lots of indirect map control, using CDs to take space. How about you use your feet to take space and you use your CDs to leave? You can take the space safely because you have the CD that allows you to leave if it's too dangerous. But okay. Can also take space using CDs, sure. Cons. Not able to sustain fights, generally low healing. Yeah, it doesn't sustain fights well. I suppose low healing is fair. I mean, Anna Brig is pretty common these days for the actual Winston dive comps. And I'm not really convinced I'd call that a low healing comp, but Zen Ball is the more common dive comp, and Zen Brig is low healing. It's not really that, like, healing is low, it's that this resources don't sustain very long. Like, Anna does, like, it is low, healing is low if you're running Zen Brig, but healing isn't really low if you're running Anna Winston. It's just that your sustain resources, Winston's sustain resources, other than actually leaving, aren't as good as Reinhardt's sustain resources, aren't as good as Orissa's sustain resources, aren't as good as Sigma's sustain resources for poking anyway, aren't as good as Roadhog's sustain resources. Like, it's more that the sustain resources that the heroes have are mostly just leave. It's not really a healing thing because sustain isn't just the amount of healing available, it's barriers, it's durability, it's defensive cooldowns. Oh, okay, JD. Hey, it's the author. Just wanted to say this is very insightful, and don't worry about being harsh. It's more to learn. Comp versus comps are talked about more in the RPS comps. Okay, cool. Glad you're here. I'll try and pay extra attention for your chats here if you have questions, comments, things like that. But we're going to continue on through. Coordination cons, another coordination heavy, timing of dives needs to be precise. Yeah, you do get better at recognizing it. Like, your timing of dives should be precise. You can have situations where you want anyone to be able to call a dive, but you also need everyone to be disciplined enough. And it really works better in the modern era to just sort of understand, get your good surround on the enemy team. You know, I'm drawing arrows here. I might as well just jump over here. Get your good surround on the enemy team. And if you do that, if you have a good surround on the enemy team, you should already recognize when you can hit a dive, and anyone should be able to call dive, walk on them, commit, something like that. But even if you don't, especially against a comp like this, like Brawl, that you don't immediately want to dive, you want to soften up first, like, you can actually do a lot without diving. If you just take 3 angles, and here, maybe it'll feel better if I take her out. We won't delete her. We'll just swap her out for a Sombra, for example. If you take angles around a composition and you apply pressure from 3 different angles, even if they're better than you at poke, which a Brawl poke hybrid might be, like a McCree BAP Brawl might be better than the dive comp at poke if it's running, say, Sombra Tracer, you're still probably going to outpoke them and pretty obviously drain their resources if you're just able to hold your angles without getting eliminated, without being foolish, and then it'll be obvious that you can dive because they're weak, or you'll even generate an elimination, at which point, if you're still all alive, it's pretty obvious that it's time to dive. So, like, I would actually put less emphasis these days on, like, yes, our dive timing has to be perfect, and more on getting your map control. If you get your map control, even with a comp that is relatively low poke, at least if you're running the Zen, but with a comp that is relatively low poke, you're still going to pressure them, sort of pressure cook them, and then the dive is actually going to become less serious. Like, yes, when you do call the dive, everyone needs to dive, but it'll be more obvious. You don't need to rush it, that sort of thing, if you're able to do this, at least in the modern era. That said, if you are trying to go hard for the dives, if you are trying to go, hey, no, we need to be able to hit dives instantly, which can be more important against, say, heavy poke comps, still establish your appropriate map control. That's absolutely important. And then as soon as you see an opening and you want to call the dive, that's fine. You could have one main dive call, which could be good, and everyone else is feeding them information. You can, when someone calls the dive, you do have to dive. You can try to do countdowns when you're learning dive, of diving in 3, 2, 1. Most of the time, again, I'd favor taking that good map control and sort of pressure cooking them, and then your dive will become obvious. When someone does call dive, yes, you should dive. If you can't dive, there should be a call out of can't, something like that. Not, we're not diving, but that you specifically can't because you don't have your translocator, because you don't have boosters, you don't have leap, that sort of thing. And the team may still very well still dive. You are not calling off the dive, but if you hear multiple can'ts, the dive is probably being called off. Okay. Uh, Now we get into sort of the how to play it bullets. Scout targets who are defenseless or out of position, usually backline, Zen, Mercy, etc. I don't really care if they're defenseless. Like, a Sigma can defend itself, but I don't care. If it's out of position or alone, I'm still going to dive it from multiple sides and crush it. Yeah. That said, there are targets that you're generally not going to dive, like a Reinhardt. You're just really not interested most of the time. Too much armor for most of the dive heroes to deal with. Okay. Stage the dive, surround the enemy without using cooldowns. Yes. Surround the enemy without using cooldowns, or if you have to use your cooldowns to take your staging, you then have to recover. You then have to be able to stay in your staged position or near your staged position in a place that you can reclaim it without using your cooldown until you can get them back and actually go in from there. Dive from all angles, completing the dive. 3 is a good number. You can do 4. Sometimes 2 will happen. 3 is a good number. Find safe cover, repeat. Sure. Pre-fight scouting, who? Everyone. Sombra best. Oh, everyone should do pre-fight scouting, and Sombra's the best because she cheats with invisibility. Yep. Everyone is responsible for pre-fight scouting. Your core can call it, because modern dive these days, the closest thing to dive is the Zen ball comp right now, and you have a core in that. It might be a Zen Brig Diva, Zen Brig Sigma type thing, but they can call it. But a lot of your communication needs to be happening from your ball, your tracer, maybe your Sombra, maybe your Echo, maybe your Hanzo, whatever you have there. Who and where is the target? Sure. Dive timing, who? Main tank. Reasonably good person to call it, yeah. Whoever calls engages, better answer, yep. What? Countdown, 3, speed boost. No. Where was my Lucio? Where was my Lucio in my dive list? There's no Lucio in this dive list. But countdowns 3, speed boost 2, diva ball 1, monkey tracer 0, all burst damage, ultimate speed up macro game. Okay, so speed boost, if you do run Lucio, isn't actually used on the way in to take the. If you do run Lucio in your dive, it's not actually used on the way in for your dive most of the time. It's used as we use our movement abilities to hit our dive to go in from multiple angles, and our Lucio comes in with us or stays back and protects our Zen or Anna, who we've kept there. The speed amp is actually used to allow your divers to stay on the target that they're trying to eliminate, as it tries to use its ability, like coach weapon, to get out. Or your speed amp is used to allow your divers to quickly get out if the dive worked or didn't work, because they're weak now that they've used their abilities. They got the elimination, and they don't want to allow, say, a Brawl team to trade back into them and get eliminations while they're weak. They want to use, and they don't have their movement abilities if they use those to go in. So the amp helps them get out, helps them round a corner, helps them run away. And then they're able to, go, okay, well, now we have our abilities back, and now we go in for another dive. That's actually how you use Lucio in a dive setup most of the time. You don't use him to make your dash go further, your Winston jump go further. That's not how those things work. You can use the speed boost to, if you have a core, help your core run in from further faster. That is a thing that you can do, but I probably wouldn't rush that. That would not be something I'd feel the need to call out in a guide that isn't going into this level of detail in most things. I do see what we're trying here in terms of we're trying to do the timings. You can't really do the timings like this. You're going 3 speed boost, 2 diva ball, 1 monkey tracer, and the reason they're doing this is diva and ball of course has a wind up thing where it's like, oh, I use my tether, I start to go in. Diva, I use my boosters, I start to go in, because diva goes in slower than monkey, who more explosively goes in, or tracer, who double blinks in if need be. I get what you're trying to do here. I don't actually respect it. And the reason I don't actually respect it is people are going to be staged at different distances. People are going to be staged at different distances. My balls version of going in might be, hey, they managed already to get above the opponent. They're already sitting above the choke at Hollywood First, for example, tethered, and they're just ready to pile drive as soon as the team walks by, and that's their dive. Well, they can't go early, that sort of thing, or because they're just dropping. They definitely don't want to go there. Or, hey, my diva has to use boosters. No, because my diva might have to use boosters unless she's closer than my Winston, which is certainly a possibility, and you'd see that on Numbani, where my Diva Brig Zen core might be walking through the high ground first point, Diva Zen Numbani, whereas my monkey might be going down main on the low ground and have to jump in from the side. Well, I don't want my Diva boostering in early in that situation because my monkey actually has further to go. So this is really distance dependent, and people just have to get used to their abilities. Okay. Okay. Cool. Okay. Ultimate speed up macro game. Create space. Make opportunities. Tank ults. Tank ults. Make opportunities. If we're strictly thinking about Winston Diva Zarya, where's my Sigma? I don't think most of us would consider Grav a space making ult. And I'm also perfectly willing, again, I don't like this terminology, but since we've already used it here, enabler ults and finisher ults. Oh, you put Diva in enabler ults. Yeah, Diva can be that. I actually find she's better used in a finisher ult category because what happens with her is you want to be using your self-destruct. Again, I don't like these categories, but if I were to use them, what happens is you want to be using your ult as Diva, not just to go, oh, hey, I'm going to throw the self-destruct to make the opponent's move. You want to be using self-destruct to get a fresh mech. You want to replenish your DM, maybe replenish your micro missile, get back some of your health in a fight that's messy to help you sustain. You want to do that. Yes, you also want to use your boosters during it, but if you're doing those things, oh, it should be later in the fight, and it's more likely to be something that's getting eliminations than it is to be, oh, I forced the team to move. That said, it can be used as an answer to a team that's pushing with Transcendence, things like that. Because of that, because you put it in enabler, you're talking about it as a space maker. Again, I don't really want to use it like that. I'd rather combo it with primal and get an elimination or multiple eliminations, but whatever. None of us would think about Zarya's or Sigma's ults as making space, and I know you didn't list Sigma, but whatever. Okay. Deal damage, dive phase, DPS ults. Who did we list as our DPS? Tracer, Genji, Sombra. Sure, except that Tracer regularly pre-fight gets eliminations with Pulse Bomb. Genji's is kind of right. Sombra's is kind of more in the tank ult category. It's not really making space, but it's kind of the first thing that happens when the dive happens. Support DPS, ensure offensive plays from DPS, nano, EMP, etc. Okay, so you put it in its own category. Counter dives after weakness, cover dives after weakness, help sustain support ults. Oh, okay. So you want to use support ults to cover that, similar to how I talked about using amp. Okay, that's fine. It allows you to brawl for longer. If you dive a team and you don't get the limbs you want, or you do get a limbs, or they use support ults, you have your own to help you brawl better. Sure, sure. Okay, we're talking about the roles here. Tanks, force abilities, and take space for DPS. Makes sense. One tank absorbs the travel damage, Matrix Bubbles. Second tank takes space at dive location, Monkey Bubble. Sure, except that Hamster exists and ruins that paradigm because, like, Diva doesn't go in with Hamster the same way. Hamster sometimes gets a Zarya bubble, but really doesn't need it. He'll take it if you have a Zarya because it's good energy for your Zarya and it does make his job easier, but like sort of broke that paradigm. Force abilities and take space for DPS. One tank, that's fine. One tank absorbs the travel damage. Second tank takes space at dive location. Again, you absorb the travel damage best by having 3 or 4 different angles so that the opponents are split in where they're looking and really can't focus and a bit panicked. And spam meant for one person doesn't hit others. Like, okay. DPS. Output maximum damage in shortest time on one target. How? Supporting role, reduce peeling, reduce mobility, reduce aggressiveness. Damage reduces aggressiveness. But I think what you're getting into here is things like Sombra, who can reduce the peeling a team has. I'll put maximum damage in shortest time on one target. Supporting role, reduce peeling, reduce mobility, reduce aggressiveness, distract Reaper, TP window, or direct tack freeze. I'm not running Mei in very many dive comps. Damage roll, use cover to play as offensively as possible, find angles behind to side, use least amount of resources in approaching, stay longer in fight, do not approach the same direction as tanks. Well, that's good advice. I'm good with that damage roll. I'm a little on this support roll thing. It's basically just carve out for Sombra. Like, I don't know if I need a carve out specifically for Sombra. Yeah. Okay. Support. How? Direct. Abilities to increase damage. Nade. Discord. Sure. Indirect. Help team to stay longer and fight. Heal tanks. Contest longer. More DPS. Sure. Positioning. Stay hidden. No staging. Not in Modern Dive. Because in Modern Dive, I brought a Brig along, and I want my Brig to contribute when we actually pull the trigger on the dive. I want my Brig and my Sigma or my Brig and my Diva to walk in, and the safest way for them to do that is probably going to involve my Zen walking in as well. Maybe not all the way in, but most of the way in. So, like, kind of have to stage, kind of have to continue to rotate to keep them in a situation where let me get myself a swap out Diva for Sigma here. Let's get a Hammond like this. When I do need a Brig. This is going to walk on this comp. After we've softened this Brawl comp up enough, as this dive happens, somebody doesn't actually have to get that close for the dive, these guys are going to walk into Brawl. If we're diving, with the modern dive comps, my Brig does actually need to go in and brawl for the actual completed serious dive. If we're just holding our angles and pressuring this team down to get resources out or to try to get eliminations while holding our angles, yeah, my Brig doesn't have to go in. But if we actually, and my ball might go in and out, my ball might hit a pile drive and leave, my ball might do a roll through, get an adaptive shield, stay sort of in, spending his adaptive shield to fight. But if we actually go in hard, like I'd actually say in the modern era, it's not a true dive, it's just staging, it's just poking for resources, unless your Brig is walking in. So, and to do that, you have to stage yourself in places where you're going to be able to walk in for the actual dive. Temporal, you're telling me that EMP is not a zoning gold? Okay, I'll catch up in chat at the end of the dive section, guys. I promise. You guys have some good stuff there. Okay. Okay. Reset after dive, situational. You're right. Sometimes you can just chain it together. You got your dive and go fish for more and go chain eliminations together. Other times you do need to do a soft reset. You do need to, and you can call it stabilizing. You can call it stabilizing. The same call that you'd use in Brawl is perfectly acceptable. But stabilize for dive generally means get out, get cover, that sort of thing. Wait for your cooldowns to come back where you can combine those cooldowns for that burst of power to force another elimination. Situational abilities, position, health, ultimates, player advantage. If you have chance, reset, play slow. Okay, I'm going to let that go. Attacking and defending advantages, when or where to fight. Stage to dive, kill zones on defense. Usually we call those boxes, not zones, but okay. Where, who, and a main, sure. I wanted more than that. We today attacking and defending advantages, and now we're moving on to spam or poke as our new composition type. And I really wanted to talk more about what do we do on attack versus defense. And really where this discussion goes is this discussion goes into, hey, you set up for boxes that as opponents walk through, yes, you get to dive them. That's a great way to think about things on defense. That's a fantastic way to think about things on defense from a very basic level. But really what it's about is get your proper staging done, and you might have to battle for lanes for staging space. Your tracer has to battle another tracer. Your ball has to battle a Sombra to try to win their lanes, to push back their divers to get yours in there. Or, oh hey, they're playing a double shield comp, and you have to go, okay, we have to figure out how to get a good surround on them, or we have to figure out how to get a good surround on them on one of their groups to be able to hit a dive. Or maybe they're playing a brawl with tracer. We have to contain their tracer. We can't let their tracer out. We have to force their tracer back towards their comp or back towards their side of the map, and then potentially we can dive or pressure cook their brawl setup right there. Like that, I'd get more into. There's really not enough. Like, yes, I'm curious. What do you have to say about attacking and defending advantages? Because I really feel like we didn't cover that here. And you can talk about boxes here. That's absolutely a thing. But really, I'd talk more about your lane play. Okay, I'll catch up on chat here. Can I not unrank to GM Winston? You probably, yeah, you could unrank to GM Winston right now, I think. You'd struggle a little bit against, you'd struggle a little bit as you'd run into some of the Zen Ball stuff. Ball and Winston, it's tough to play Winston into Ball, though it's doable. And you'd struggle a little bit against some of the double shield stuff you might run into because you can cleave it pretty hard, especially if you're pulling Zaryas. If you're getting Zaryas on your team, you can cleave it pretty hard, hit soft dives, really make them uncomfortable, charge up primals, and win with that. Doable, doable. You could unrank to GM that, sure. Since Overwatch University has been recognized as a C-tier educational resource, I appreciate Temporal vetting the content in the subreddit to hopefully raise your IQ. Thank you, Anton. Did they make C level though? I thought Cager rated them lower than that. Did they get bumped up? Okay. Do you think it will be impossible to create new basic team comps now that the three main strategies, Dive, Brawl, Poke, exist, regardless of what future heroes are released? Basically, yeah. Um, Again, you could get into, I mean, yes, you could maybe sort of break it with like, okay, we're going to play heavily around sim TPs, but isn't that really just a Poke type composition, or isn't that a Brawl type composition? Like, mostly, yeah, but I don't think that's bad. Like, I don't think that's some big serious limiter on how we're allowed to think about the game. I think we can fit most things into those three ways to play the game, or hybridizations between those ways to play the game, and that's fine. Like, that's not like, oh, we've created some. Yeah, that doesn't bother me. Lanes are in spam RPS. I didn't considering using the same idea for Dive Brawl. Oh, it's incredibly important for Dive. Okay, okay. Yes, Winston Diva, Tracer, Lucio, Zen, May, the classic of Dive, right? Okay, let's move on to spam. Orisa, Sigma, Diva, Hog, Ball, Hanzo. Ball made it into spam and didn't make it into dive. I understand that's probably what he's second best at. Like, he's good at enabling poke. Don't get me wrong. He's better at enabling poke than Winston is. But he should be in both categories. He belongs more in the dive category. Hanzo, Widow, Echo, Ashe, Bap, Zen, Mercy. Yeah, okay. It's again like Babzen and Mercy are all are all poke heroes, so I'm good with it. But a lot of your poke comps are going to use Brig. I get it. You in your Brawl tried to go heavy with the heroes that were actually Brawl heroes, but you included Lucio. And then here you tried to go on the ones that were actually dive heroes, but you included Brig and Mercy. And like the dive hero of these is actually Lucio. Now, you don't use him because hybrids are just better these days. Brig or Mercy, mostly Brig does more for you, but similar thing here, most of the time Brig does more for you, even though Babson and Mercy are technically the poke enabling spam support heroes. Okay, pros. Most map control, taking angles to spam. Dive exists. Like, Poke wants a lot of angles. Poke wants a lot of map control, but it just can't keep it against dive. Like, you're going to get into the rock, paper, scissors of it, I know, but like, I actually think dive, A, takes space from poke too easily to be saying that the poke has the most map control. And I'd also say poke doesn't actually, like, poke spreads out, but poke is generally not going to take four groups. Like, I've talked about three groups sort of being the magic number, and it kind of is, but dive will find itself with four different angles somewhat frequently, and it's not wrong. It might have a core group with 2 to 3 people in it, and then, so let's say you're playing, for example, as dive, Sigma, Zen, Brig, and those three stack, and then you have a Tracer over here, a Sombra over here, and a Ball behind the opponents. And then your opponents are right here. Well, now you have 4 angles. That's fine. They can handle that. They're also fine moving their ball to join one of them, or stacking their Sombra and their Tracer and putting their ball separately and having 3 angles. That's fine. But like, if I have a setup where I have Orisa, and maybe I have my Zen with my Orisa, and then over here I have my Sigma, and maybe I have a Hanzo with them, like, maybe I'm going to have a third angle that I'm going to have an Ashe on, Maybe a Mercy Echo, something like that. Like, I suppose that could happen. Yeah, that's 3 angles. That can happen. I'm never really going to get to 4 angles. That's not going to happen. And it's not going to be that rare that I play with 2 main angles. So, and it's really easy to make me give these up. Like, Brawl can walk at someone and make them surrender it, and we can't re-grab our map control near as quickly. Brawl can walk on a dive aspect and make the dive aspect leave too, but the dive aspect can very quickly retake different portions of map control. They can rotate their whole team very effectively. Poke has to pay a lot more attention to, well, we need to rotate our team, but we need to rotate our team in a way that we keep sightlines on the Brawl comp basically the whole time for it to work. Orisa really doesn't rotate very well because she can't shoot and rotate at the same time. We don't have the mobility that dives. I can't buy into this. Like, it's no. Okay. Taking angles to spam, it's not different than taking angles to dive. High range damage, able to poke out enemies, sure. Not as cooldown reliant as Brawl Dive. Yeah, I'd agree with it's not as cooldown as reliant as Dive. I guess I'd say it's not as cooldown reliant as Brawl. Yeah, okay. Not as much to stand in a fight, wants to keep distance from enemies, not as much mobility as Dive. Well, it hates the Brawl phase. Like, it absolutely hates the Brawl phase, and it wants a poke phase. Like, it does want to keep its distance. It doesn't sustain super well, but it puts out a ton of pressure. Sure. Split up and take angles, generally 3-3 split, 1 DPS, 1 tank, 1 support. You're telling me that it doesn't have as much map control as Dive right here, because you're telling me that you want a 3-3 split, 2 groups. Ultimate speed up macro game, yep. It's generally true. Sometimes your ultimates invert your macro game, like when you make a poke comp better at when you make a brawl comp better at poke than a poke comp by using high noon window, things like that. When you make a dive comp better than a brawl comp at brawl because you use things like rally, minefield as the dive comp, those sorts of things. But most of the time, yeah, they speed up your macro game. Okay, tanks. Buy as much time to keep spamming. Diva Bomb on point or in backline. Primal disrupts locations. What are we talking about Primal? Winston wasn't in my tank list. I'm being difficult. Okay. Primal to disrupt rotation, specifically when the opponents are in the vulnerable portions of your rotation in what we could call a kill box, similar to what Dive does there. There are weak points in every map's rotation. There are places where you're vulnerable. Those would be, if you were playing a poke dive hybrid or a dive comp, those might be places that you'd hit soft dives, and you might take multiple engages, and then on the fourth one or the third one, actually do your hard dive, try to eliminate them, that sort of thing. And you can do the same thing here. You'd want to hit a cooldown cycle with your poke, where you're using TNT, Storm Arrow, throwing a 5 orb, throwing your Halt, maybe throwing Rock, that sort of thing, as they rotate through the particularly weak spots. And yes, that would be a place that you'd use a Primal. You might use Self-Destruct to mess up that rotation as they're going through it, so they have to change the route and back out and then try to go through it again. Maybe. Again, not my favorite way to use it. DPS, deal damage to drain enemy resources. Barrage, deal damage to drain enemy resources. No, I want to win when those happen. If I use Barrage, I want to win. And if I use Dragon during rotation, I'm hard committing during that rotation too. My poke comp is walking into you and brawling you during that Dragon. Because we now think we are the stronger brawl comp because you're trying to fight us in a dragon, or we've split you with the dragon and we're the stronger brawl because it's a 6v3 type thing. So I wouldn't really say all that about draining resources. Like, I actually want to win during those. These would be more the finisher category if we're talking about enabling and finishing ults. Supports. Support tanks to buy time or DPS to deal more damage. Okay. Transcendent steel tanks, more time to DPS. Bat Matrix for another spam angle, more DPS. Sure. Okay, so that covered spam. Spam feels less filled out than Brawl, we had a fair amount. We included a calls section in our brawls. Dive is pretty filled out. We went really light on this because communication is now its own topic. It looks like its own topic in our table of contents. This isn't Poke's communication. Okay, so this is lightly done, which makes me think that you either have the least notes here, you understand it the least. I actually know from having spoken with Thor that this is his favorite way to play the game, so I doubt that this is light because Thor is light on this in what effectively this person is my understanding is they kind of looked at Thor's work, they took notes from that, they maybe looked at some other stuff and they tried to create this to help a collegiate team. I think that's what we saw in the post here. By the way, I do sell coaching to collegiate teams. Just saying. But more seriously, I'm surprised that this is light. You could absolutely talk about cooldown cycles with your poke comps here. You could absolutely talk about what callout should look like, and those are very tied together concepts. Like, we generally understand that our cooldown cycle, when we're the most aggressive, is going to be when we throw down our fresh Orisa shield, or it's going to be when we throw out that halt. And we would like those things to happen also when the opponents are rotating through the most dangerous portion of the composition, or that sort of thing. So, like, we would like our call out that our halt is going out so we can combine our halt with our storm arrow, with our TNT, with our echo stickies, all those things. And then we would like our calls to convert us to the brawl phase if we're using something like the Dragon Strike there to split them, or the Barrage, or if we just feel we got enough of an advantage. And then, okay, how do we ping pong our comp forward? How do we attack with this composition? How do we use our two groups, our Sigma group and our Orisa group? I'd like more discussion here, because you do have to use your Sigma group to approach, to hit stuff from the side to force them back to allow your Orisa group to go forward. Okay. Ah, yes. Edel just did Unranked to GM Winston. I realized why that character can be so boom robust watching it. Edel made him look broken more than his other Unranked GMs, but Winston normally feels balanced. Right, but most people playing in, I don't know what rank he first place there, but gold, plat, whatever, don't have primal mechanics, and Edel does. Like, you can do the different, like, primal levels up a lot as an example. There's more we can get into there, but it's a tangent. It's not the only thing that makes Winston broken in good hands. Was Mercy played with Dive in the past due to lack of options? I used to think her mobility allowed her to keep up with Dive, which is why she could dive. You could definitely think of her as a dive hero. If you really truly thought of the supports that were dive supports, you'd be going Lucio Mercy. They both have the mobility, and mobility is the key aspect of dive. The problem with that, of course, is you really lack sustain or enough pressure. And you might go, but Zen doesn't give you very much sustain either. Right, but Zen gives you pressure, and sustain and pressure are really just different sides of the same coin, where Zen goes, okay, we put a ton more pressure on the team, so the fight ends faster, the opponent's health drains faster, that works, whereas someone like Moira doesn't put very much pressure on the opponent, but slows down how fast the fight ends against you because she pumps out a lot of healing. So, like, Zen works in that category. Lucio Mercy really struggle because, while conceptually they can go damage boost plus amp speed, that's relatively high pressure, relatively high damage. Again, that's not actually how amp really tends to get used with a dive comp. It's more of a stabilized type thing. Or the reality is, when those two supports get run together, it's so that no one on their team can be committed on, because they're being run with a bunch of other people who also can't be committed on, but then their total sustain is a little poor. And okay, do you have enough damage, because your Lucio isn't really contributing offensive damage other than his own shots? He doesn't actually have something that is helping you because he's holding his amp as a safety maneuver in a lot of ways. You don't really have that Zen, that nade, the BAP damage. You don't really have any of that to be like, okay, now we can hit you hard, or even the Moira sustain to let your dive brawl hit particularly hard there. So, like, yes, you could say Mercy was run, Mercy Lucio were run in the past with dive because Mercy Lucio and Zen and Sim were the only supports in the past. You don't see Mercy Lucio very often these days unless it's specifically a situation where they're trying to set up so that no one can be committed on. A Brawl comp doesn't have any targets to go after, or another dive comp doesn't have any targets to go after, and it's a little gimmicky. The answer to it, by the way, is the entire gimmick breaks if you just include a Sombra on the other team, because suddenly we've invested everything in being able to go, hey, no one can catch us. Well, guess what? If Sombra lands a hack on anyone, they're just going to get rolled. They're going to get run out by a Brawl team. They're going to get dove at by another team, and you're definitely not winning the oncoming Brawl. You're definitely not winning the oncoming Brawl, dive, mid-fight, whatever you want to call it, with Lucio Mercy. I do put the lanes discussion in spam RPS. I feel rock paper scissors. I feel it would have been better suited to the general spam part. Okay. I think it needed to be covered. I think it could have. I don't know. I'm gonna have to judge it when I see it, but I actually really think it needed to be most discussed in dive. It matters in spam, poke, whatever we want to call it, but I think it would have been most interesting in dive. To be perfectly honest, it might have had to be in both. Started playing seriously around original Orisa Sigma. I mistakenly learned Orisa to be Brawl. I hear ya. I hear ya. An elimination box. There we go. Your barrage better win the fight because you're going to be down fair afterwards. Right. You've been out of the loop the last few months like macro breakdowns? Happy to hear it. We're here to oblige. Pessy K says, playing Brawl Hybrid Comp, should you spend shield Brawl Hybrid Comp? Should you spend shield against poke comps as they rotate to tax them or save it? Well, Brawl Hybrid what? A Brawl poke comp? A Brawl dive comp? Because you can hybridize your Brawl comp in two different ways. And if you're talking about, if you're playing a Brawl poke hybrid against a poke comp, it depends. I wouldn't generally want to take a full poke fight against a poke composition, so I wouldn't spend my shield. I'd make them come in closer. I'd make them come closer to me. I'd go, hey, we are the, we, okay, I don't really have the right heroes for this anymore, so let me go like this. If I was a reasonable Brawl poke hybrid, so say I've got McCree and Bap, I suppose I can do that. I've got McCree and Bap. I might go, hey, I'm trying to do some work here like this, whatever, cool. Maybe I'm enabling this, maybe I'm enabling this. I might do a little bit of this against a poke comp if the poke comp was down people. Or if I had ults to punish them with as they're coming in and they're caught in the open, I would not be. But most of the time, if it's not a situation where they're down a few people waiting for people to turn, or we're in a situation where the Echo's fighting over here and we can align everyone to fight the Echo here, where the Zen goes, wait a second, I don't have anyone to shoot at. I'd be going, no, I'm going to play a little bit more back here and make you guys actually come in deeper, because when you come in deep like this, you either bring your Zen close to get an angle, and now I can potentially make a play on this Zen with Amp, or you bring your Echo in close, or both, and then I can go, hey, let me just Maywall to keep this Zen out, to not make this Zen relevant, or maybe a situation where, you know, I'm going to go, hey, we're going to send Diva at, you're going to send Diva at maybe your Echo while we send everyone here, or maybe we're going to go ahead and send everyone after your Echo while we spend, you know, a Maywall back here to make the Tracer go, wait, what? You spent a Maywall on me as Tracer? I'm just going to go around it. But that's still enough time for us to 6v2 an Echo Mercy that can't really get support, and it's also going to mess up, say, the ball who's coming in here. And you might be going, well, that's not real. I said poke comp, but the map I have up just doesn't allow for a poke comp to really play. You'd never run a real poke comp against this comp on this map. You'd run a poke dive hybrid. So the answer to your question is only if I have something special going on where my poke has become better or equal to theirs. And that might be I have ults available that make my poke better, or that might be they don't have people available either because of map geometry, so I can take one poke fight at a time, or people who are respawning but they're choosing to try to poke fight us anyways, and I'm going, well, that's stupid. We'll poke fight you while you're down people. Sombra is one of the best heroes for a DPS player to learn if they are playing in tournaments, in my opinion, even in gold plat tournaments. For organized play, Sombra is amazing. For ladder, she's a lot more meh, and you're mostly better off playing her as a slightly off angling Sombra 76. I like to think hybrid comp is another way of saying bad comp. You can think that, but hybrid comps are the best way to play the game. Like hybrid, I would, I it would, I don't really want to run Reinhardt, Zarya, Moira, May, Reaper. I'd much rather include a McCree and a Brig in there and give myself enough poke aspect to make my Brawl be able to have multiple ways to win. I don't really want to run a full dive, though I'll do it, with, hey, Sombra, Tracer. I mean, that one I'm a little more willing to do, but even so, I've at least put Ball in there, who's kind of himself a hybrid between a dive and a poke hero, leaning much more heavily dive. And Brick. I mean, I've dropped a Brick, a Brawl hero, into my dive there. Okay, well, that's pretty important. You're not really going to be able to get me to run Zen Mercy very often in a dive comp. And if I am running Zen Mercy or Zen Lucio, it's because, so Zen Mercy in this case, it's because I've included a different poke hero, not Sombra, like Echo or something along those lines. So hybrids and their more flexible win conditions are generally better. Okay, into communication. Plan. What are we doing? How will it happen? Where will we go? When will it happen? Okay. Okay. It's a little complicated. That's a lot of information to try to communicate between fights, especially with the pace that the game gets to as you get better. I don't know what level the collegiate team you're working with is, but this is a lot of information to go over. Shot caller makes the plan with information given to them. I think we just had the shot caller discussion of a fight planner can do that, but the fight planner is probably one of a couple different shot callers you have. Shot calling is a kind of concept, but there's not generally just one person doing it. One with best knowledge of macro fights. Okay, is that who our shot caller is? What else will be used? Resetting, etc. Okay. Well, resetting is a mid-fight call. That's done by your fight caller, which might not be the same as the person who makes your plan, but it might be. 99% zero Koth, use unimportant ults to trade enemy ults, pulse for nano. Okay. You will get mid-fight plans made like that. That's not totally out of the question. It's a little more advanced. Follow the shot caller, 6 people with 1 pad plan, greater than 6 people with 6 good plans. True. Usually main tank as they are frontlining and cannot easily change plans. That's true in Brawl. Like, that's true in Brawl, but in Dive, my Hammond can call some of the dives that he wants, but he doesn't really have a good idea of what's going on with my core team. Like, he has a pretty good idea of what he wants. He maybe has an idea of if Tracer or Sombra or someone can help him. He really has less vision than, say, my Echo or my Zen or my Brig really does in terms of what's going on. Brig, who's at the back, can see a lot of things, and Brig might be able to call stuff. Is Brig going to call your dives? Probably not, but maybe. I mean, like, it's a little more flexible than this is the reality. And it's why teams that are sometimes built for one meta, and then people will go, no, that team's going to be great. Like, they're doing well in this meta, but it's fine because if it shifts meta, we'll be in a different meta where, well, that's this person's best hero, so this team will be fine if the meta shifts. And you go, oh, wait, why are they not fine? And it can be because it breaks your calling structure, because your calling structure has to be flexible enough to allow for it, or you have to relearn a calling structure and shoot, maybe in the past in Brawl it made the most sense for your Reinhardt to do target calling, but now it makes more sense for your Zen to do target calling, or it makes more sense for your someone else to do target calling, and whoops, what are we going to do because our Zen isn't very talkative? Now, that's just an example. You can absolutely make target calling work with Ball, but he's going to have less information than he had before. So how are you going to patch this up? Like, this stuff has to be a little more flexible than that, and people tend to make calling a little more, well, this is the perfect way that calling is supposed to happen, just like this. And like, I'll fix issues if you have them with your comps, but it's kind of hard to go, this is perfect for all metas and all comps, because it's not really terribly surprising to realize that, well, what's ideal in this composition isn't necessarily ideal in this composition for calling. Like I said, generally, flex DPS calling your targets wouldn't be particularly amazing. They're going to get caught up in Hanzo duels and things like that, and they can't really be focused on that sort of thing. However, when they're playing Mei or Sombra, it makes a lot of sense. What do you do? Okay. Usually main tanks as they're frontlining and cannot easily change plans. Reinhardt can't easily change targets, unlike a Zarya DPS, etc. Sure. You're thinking Brawl centric. Name of target, position of target, follow-up calls from team. I don't necessarily need my team to all acknowledge that they're on the target. I've seen teams try this. It's a lot of comm clutter. Teams also sometimes get a little too caught up in target calling, where once you get teams good enough, they can all individually recognize what the right target to be on is. Hint, it's usually the target that's on the greatest off angle or the target that's the most vulnerable. The target on the greatest off angle is frequently the most vulnerable target. The target on the greatest off angle is also the target who's doing the most damage to your team or is the most threatening to your team. Obviously, this changes based on available cooldowns, your team's ability to punish, etc. Collegiate team is around mid-plat and usually try to force Rhine Brawl compositions. Hence, more Brawl-focused view. That makes sense. Okay. Happy to see more stuff in Collegiate. That's always fun. Okay. Ult Tracker. So we're doing this like shot caller is a thing. You just made shot caller a thing, and you're making ult tracker something else. So shot caller makes plan with information given to them, so they're your fight planner. They should be the one with the most macro. The person with the most macro knowledge does make sense to be your fight planner. They're also doing mid-fight calls, mid-fight replans for like Pulse for Nano. They're also doing target calling. You can, again, it's totally fine for your fight planner and your target caller to be the same person. It's not strictly necessary. Ult tracker, cool. Figures out ults on both teams, gives ideas as how they'll be used. Sure. Usually support as they see the most information during team fights, who's having the most damage done, who's getting healed on the enemy team, etc. They do see that. They actually also get to see their healing, which is like, oh, right, that's a concept. I just had to heal our diva a bunch. Oh, Zarya just melted her. Their Zarya has an extra 30% ult charge, that sort of thing. But okay. Focus on important enemy ult, space controlling. If they have Mazari ult, focus them to try to get it out at a bad time. What ults they used isn't important. Focus on what ult they have and ults they have and will use. Right, what ults they have and will use is more important, and it's more important that you're generally correct on what ults that they have than that you're precise. I don't need to know whether Rally is at 90% or 100%. Just tell me that they have Rally in that situation. I don't care if they're at 40% to pulse bomb or 70% to pulse bomb. They don't have pulse bomb. Like, getting more people mostly right is going to be better, and you don't need to be specific. I don't need to know that that they're at 30% or that they're at 70% or that they're at 10%. Like, I really just need to know, do they have the ult or not have the ult as a binary thing? And I would rather you err on the side of they have the ult if they're within, say, 10, 15, even 20% of having the ult. Okay. Yeah, and this what else they used isn't important. So like, I get that it's not important, but generally when the ult tracker is talking out loud, it's because they're doing it for themselves. And I get that's a little confusing to your team. it's a little hard for me to say don't do that because the reality is other people will jump in and say other ults that got used that they missed if your ult tracker isn't perfect. So it's a little hard for me to say cut that out. If your ult tracker is just amazing at ult tracking, yes, they should cut that out and not say that part out loud because it does create a little more comm clutter, etc. And it gives you more time for your team to use that comm space for other things, which is helpful. But I wouldn't go super hard on that one, especially on a team that isn't elite or doesn't have an absolutely elite ult tracker. And I do mean absolutely elite. Like GM tier 3, very high tier 3 teams are going to still be listing the ults that were used in the last fight because it allows other people to chime in if they missed one, which makes the ult tracking more accurate for what does come up there. Don't be over specific when making plans. General idea, using grab early, forcing trans for Nanoblade. Sure. Everyone scouts enemy team, so this would be, yep, scouting, everyone's job. If someone sees a flanking DPS or a mercy resing, everyone needs to know that information, as well as some important cooldowns when they come out. Anyone who sees it needs to call it. Okay. Find where enemies are holding, hiding specific heroes. Okay. If someone is out of position, key ability is used, good. Speed boost, art bubble, fade, etc. Low health. Look for opportunities to punish, force mistakes out of enemies. Sure. Force mistakes out of enemies. It's good. I'd like a little more on how. They use beat, trans, etc. Peel back until ult is done and go in with your own. Yeah, usually true. Target caller leads everyone's attention to taking down one enemy. Focusing one target makes it a 5v6, which is more winnable, which is more easily winnable. Sure. Again, you can get around this. It's easy to fall into the trap of making this too important, but okay. It's good. I'll go with it. That's fine. When trying to use ults, let the one with the ult decide how to use it. They know their hero better than you know it. Have them tell the plan on how to use it to team. No, they don't need to. They don't need to tell the plan to use it. They have a plan of how they're going to use it. Like, how do I want to answer this? Yeah, you don't micro exactly when someone else uses their ult. You don't micro that. If you're the fight planner, you don't macro, or the fight caller, you don't macro, grab. Like, I promise your Zarya knows that they need to grab, or they should if you guys are at a similar tier level, and they just haven't found a way that they can reasonably get it off yet. So, like, that's why some call structures have the person who wants to use their ult take over the fight calling a little bit more when they do it, so they can call for pressure on the diva, so they can call for the Mei wall to zone things that they want, so that they can, do those sorts of things. Or the diva who, the key is eating their grab might call the fight a little more to put more pressure on the Zarya to make the eat easier. Like, that's sometimes a thing that happens. I don't really need people explaining ahead of time exactly how they're going to use the ult. Like, again, I guess I just look at this and go, sometimes they'll pipe in, but I don't need them to say very often because it's what we said earlier about general is better than specific with this kind of thing. So, like, if the plan is that you're going to win with Nanoblade, Genji knows that. They probably don't need to tell their team exactly how and when they're going to Nanoblade. Example, Zarya says to use grab early and will need shield discord from Ryan Zarya. Example, Zarya says to use grab early and will need shield discord from Ryan Zarya. I don't know what that means. Our Zarya is going to grab early, so they want the Ryan to shield for them? Yeah, I don't know. Prepare plans and VOD reviews, execute in game. Okay. You can afford to prepare plans a little bit more in scrims than you might in matches as well. Like, this is a nice ideal, but you probably scrim more than you VOD review. And I don't want you to just bang your head into a wall repeatedly and just lose in a scrim because you refuse to try anything new, because you refuse to try any new rotations, anything like that. So I'll give this like 60% agree. Fight structure, start, rollout, posture, opportunity, poke. Okay, posture is opportunity, poke, positioning. Okay, engage, win, win. That's not how I'd structure a fight, but okay. I mean, start, rollout makes sense on like the very, very first fight, especially on Koth. I don't know that I'd then be like opportunity, poke, positioning. Like poke and position. If I was to do a fight stages, let's start with Brawl. And by Brawl, I'm referring to what you would generally call the mid fight, which is when you're actually in there in a relatively close range fight trying to finish each other off. Dive and Brawl comps obviously do this, but poke comps will do this too. Your Orisa walks in, has Fortify, tries to finish off when they have enough of an advantage. Cool. Okay. Then we'd have the cleanup or stagger phase, where you've already won the fight is decided. Um, the fight's decided, you're trying to get more staggers, you're cleaning up what's there, you're maybe talking about your plan for the next fight, that sort of thing. You're doing your ult tracking. Then you could actually get into, after this cleanup stagger phase, you have sort of a forward poke phase. This comes from another video that I'll probably do later today. Where if you got staggers, you could consider this part of the stagger phase, but if you got staggers, your lead team can push up even more aggressively than they normally would um, to poke at the enemy team. You can think of this as like, oh hey, we're on Volskaya second. We won our defensive fight really aggressively, so now we're going to go take what's usually the attacker's high ground and forward poke from there because we got staggers, because we won cleanly, didn't lose people, that sort of thing. But you're not actually going to hold this if they get to you healthy, so then you'd fall back into a choke. And if you were on offense and you had cart control, for example, this choke would want to be in front of the objective, or this choke would want to be in front of a cart that's pushing up to it, that sort of thing. But you like then go to a choke, so you could call this whatever, and you take this choke, and now the opponents are in sort of a rotation phase. They were sort of in a rotation phase during both of these things. They're in a rotation phase, and rotation phase is equivalent, as you might notice, to a poke phase. Yes, I'm writing in yellow, I'm on white. I'm sorry, guys. Which isn't really surprising because we called this a forward poke phase. So, like, poke and rotation those are simultaneous phases. Okay. And then from the choke, we potentially go back into, okay, from the choke, we're doing our rotations, we're doing all this, we're rotating during our choke phase, but we're eventually creating a fight, making a fight happen again, which is Brawl. So now we've gone full circle. So like poke and rotation happen at the same time, but you see how they're tied to staggers, to forward poke, back to a more standard chokehold poke thing, which is also rotations, which is also lane battles in other compositions. And then once it, resolves, or once we get to forcing a fight, we're back to Brawl. That's probably how I'd do this. It might not look cleaner than yours. You want posture for opportunity. Poke is part of your posturing for opportunity. Positioning, that's just rotations. Engages win is your Brawl phase. Start is your rollout. I don't really know what start as your rollout means. Like a rollout is a rotation. So like I just get rid of this one here and just be like, okay, we're posturing. Okay, cool. You call it posturing as you rotate and poke looking for an opportunity. Fine with me. Okay. Hard reset, back to start if Brawl has lost fight. Soft reset, back to posture after successful dive. Sort of. An unsuccessful dive can also lead you back to a soft reset. Soft reset really tends to refer to how far you're backing out versus how much you're not. Whereas a hard reset would be like almost get back to our spawn type levels of thing. Eh, eh, I'll deal. Spam plays around posturing, taking angles, etc. Stay posturing until you get an elimination, often forcing the engage phase until fight is won. Forcing the engage phase until fight is won. Often forgoing the engage phase until the fight is won. Okay. Yeah, the reality is once you feel comfortable with your heroes, you should be pretty comfortable walking in and forcing the brawl phase because you don't want a situation, for example, on defense where you're running an Orisa poke comp and the opponents are running a let's give them a brawl comp. We'll give them a brawl comp. And you get an elimination on their Mei and they're pushing the cart still. And the cart's still moving, and you're like, well, I'm not willing to walk on you until we eliminate 6 people. And now you've eliminated their Lucio. And you still go, well, we're still not willing to walk on you because we're afraid because you're better than us at Brawl. No, they're not. They're not better than you at Brawl anymore. And their cart is getting progress as you're doing this. This is the Orisa that everyone gets frustrated with, that feels like they never walk forward, never do anything, because they're trying to win the fight, like they're trying to like hard win the fight before they force the brawl. And what you actually need to do is you just need to create enough of a lead that you're very likely to win the fight in the brawl. You have enough of a lead, like not you've actually already won, you actually have a 6v4 advantage, but it can be like, hey, your lamp is gone, your amp is gone, your Rhine shield is weak, your wall is gone, you guys overall are at about 80% health while we're at about 95% health. Great, I'm going to walk in and win. I can do that. I can. Now, I don't have to. If, like, we're controlling the objective, you're not doing it, I can just go get a bigger lead. That's perfectly fine. But we're in a situation where this is something you want to be aware of. You don't need to decisively win before you commit. You do want to be ahead, and if you commit too early, yes, you lose a fight you were about to win, but there is something you're balancing against there with objective control. Mm-hmm. Certain plays around posturing, taking L's, stay posturing until you get an limb, often foregoing the engage phase until the fight is won. Yeah, so I disagree with this. Dive plays for opportunities. A good hack or mobility CB used. Play patient. Play patient is good advice for dive. And you can create your own opportunities. Take your angles, and you can then put pressure from those angles, especially if you're running Hammond instead of Winston, and then boom, you go with it. If you're running Winston instead, you're going to have to do repetitive soft dives to try to create opportunities or charge up an ult cycle to win with. Your soft dives will, of course, convert to a hard dive if you find an opening there. Brawl plays for the engage close-up. Best during mid-fight. Get into engage phase ASAP while conserving resources. Right, because unlike what you put earlier, you want to use your resources when you're out in the open fighting during the actual brawl. You're not using your resources to, like, delay the brawl or to sustain. No, you're using your resources to win. Okay. Fight structure was a little messy. It's hard to draw a diagram. Totally get it. Google Docs aren't amazing for that. When I watched Fusions play Orisa in ranked, so many times he would just fortify and walk in right because he feels like he's already got enough of an advantage to win the brawl phase. Orisa is not terrible in the brawl phase, guys. She's pretty bad once Fortify runs out, but Fortify lasts pretty long. Rock, paper, scissors. Spam beats the brawl. Okay? Brawl beats dive. Dive beats spam. Okay. Fundamentally true, not guaranteed. You can absolutely, this is not some, Overwatch is not a game of like, yes, you locked in Orisa, we locked in Reinhardt, we just lose. It's not that game, fortunately. Orisa certainly has an advantage on the correct map types against Reinhardt. Reinhardt has an advantage against Winston on the right map types. Yes, there is a rock, paper, scissors of sorts, but it is a game of soft counters, not a game of hard counters, might be the way to put that. Brawl versus dive strong. Live through the dive, save CDs for dive, force a mid fight. Live through the dive, save CDs for dive, force a mid fight. That's conceptually right if someone was playing pure dive against you. You just don't ever see anyone try to play pure dive against a brawl comp. So I'm resisting it a little because like it would be true if anyone ever ran Genji Tracer, Winston Diva, like yeah. If someone was doing that, I'd actually spread my brawl out a little bit, not a ton, and take my poke phase, and then stack once they started to do it. But they'd really struggle to stage successfully because we'd be poking them adequately. If they did stage successfully, then they'd dive us. Yes, we'd have our cooldowns and we'd win. So like that's true, but like when's the last time someone actually saw someone try to play pure dive? No Brig, no Echo, no Ash, weak poke phase. They're really actually trying to just beat you with the dive. Like, and if you're playing against a poke dive, you play more to not let them poke you for long enough. And I think you're much more often going to be playing against a poke dive. But fundamentally not wrong. I just think I'm worried it's going to lead people in a bad direction because you don't see true dive anymore. Fortify on point, dive to happen within a certain time, inopportune. Fortify on point, forces dive to happen within a certain time. Right, right. If you can rotate in such a way that they're not, but that's the thing. Like if you go to point, it forces them to dive you before they're able to set up appropriately. But it really doesn't take dive very long to set up. What happens is it takes dive time to either charge their ults or poke dive enough time to soften you up enough that they feel their dive will actually be successful. So, and again, if that's what we're talking about, I'm actually less worried about living through saving CDs for that. I instead want to think more about denying their staging, pushing people out of positioning. I want to look more for, hey, their diva touch point, can I rush her down, that sort of thing. I want to use my CDs when I'm pushing, when I'm rushing, when I'm trying to punish them, trying to get too greedy with the point or trying to get too greedy with an angle on us. Yep, yep. I see that, Dark Oceans. You said you recently played in a tourney as a 3.8 team against a 4.5 team, and we got destroyed so hard by Lucio, Mercy, Farah, Ball comp. Felt so bad not to have anybody to engage on. Yeah, yeah. Add Sombra to your comp. Add Sombra to your comp. You just make one swap. You now have Sombra. Their entire paradigm. Now they're still going to win because they're a 4.5 team and you're a 3.8 team. But if you just add one Sombra to your comp, you can take a Pharaoh or a Mercy out of the air. You can lock up a Ball. You can lock up a Lucio. Anything that gets hacked is a valid target for you to either rush down as a Brawl comp or dive on as your dive comp. You're still going to lose because they're a 4-5 team, but that would be the short answer to what you're dealing with there. The long answer would be they've actually got some sustained problems, and you can't actually use cover, like they're actually going to struggle to keep enough pressure on you if you try to use cover appropriately against them, make them sort of get aggressive, that sort of thing, and then repeatedly just sort of soft push them out is another way that you can go about that. But that's a bit more complicated than just add Sombra. You wish you knew that at the time. I hear you. Make as few rotations as possible. More rotations equals more opportunities for dive. I mean, yes, if they're truly running just dive, that's true, because I'm just not worried about their dive. We're going to win. The reality, though, is they're not running just true dive. They're going to be running some sort of poke aspect with their dive. It's just true in 2021. And if that's the case, you do like potentially making rotations because even if they get a poke lead on you, they're going to struggle to dive you if they're not set up with a good surround on you. So you making rotations to push someone away can be useful because now they don't have a good surround. Or you did 300 damage to the Hammond and now he's off getting a health pack when the enemy team wants to dive you. Well, that works for you. They can't dive without him. Brawl versus mirror. In any mirror, it's less about strengths weaknesses. Use chokes to defend. Stand your ground. Don't give up advantageous positions to push into them. Wait, what? Didn't you just tell us that Brawl was all about just like running them down? Now we're talking about don't give up advantageous positions. Angles are pretty good in Brawl v Brawl. Like, okay. I'm sort of glad we see this, but this is kind of an about face from before. DPS flanks, little map control gives opportunities to both teams. Yeah. DPS and off angles is great in Brawl v Brawl. Flank forces resources out, which gives frontline advantage, or just gets eliminations. But people's lives are resources, I suppose. When should they open the flank, though? You probably want to cover this, and the answer is they should probably open their off angle if you have a Kree or a Hanzo or something like that on an off angle. They're not going to be well supported on that off angle, so they probably want to pull that off angle open as the tank lines from the two teams meet, because then it's harder for someone to go adjust and deal with him over here, to box him out, like a Diva, for example. Because if the Diva leaves, she then can't DM her Rhine, who does have his own Diva or Zarya protecting him. Okay. Flanks force resources out, which give frontline advantage. Watch for enemy DPS flank. Peel with Diva Lucio. Yes. Sure. Okay. While you're peeling with those, you can potentially try to kite their aggression, but up to you. Versus spam, weak. Reduce angles for spam. Rotate side with most cover. Playing in close spaces is good. Rotate high ground. Less angles to spam. Sure. Force objective to fight. Yeah. More time to spam. Worse for Brawl. Sure. C1RGH. Brawl group practice. Okay. I'm not familiar with that code, but okay. Again, this group thing, like, it's useful when fighting. Grouping tight is useful when pushing a dive comp, for example, when trying to TP onto someone's backline, that sort of thing. It can be useful if you're just trying to be like, well, let's just do a swift punch to the chin with our Brawl comp into their comp and see how they react. But the reality is teams are pretty good now at understanding that angles win in Brawl v Brawl. So stacking is useful, but somewhat limited. Okay, we'll do. Dive. Verse spam, strong. Scout targets, least amount of self-sustained healing potential, abilities that reduce or avoid damage, supports can't heal themselves as much as team, two healers heal DPS, one healer heals one support. What? I'm not going to worry about that. Least amount of self-sustained peeling potential, that would be poke. Sort of. Poke peels for itself by threatening angles and by not letting people stage properly, by applying pressure to them. Like, poke comps peel by not letting opponents stage against them well in the first place. I agree they have the least peel once you actually get on top of them, but they do the best job of denying the staging in the first place. Well, they do a pretty good job. You could argue that divers fighting other divers, whatever. Depends on positioning, abilities, health, ultimates. Doesn't everything. Every hero can be dove, Rhine out of position, Reaper no wraith, etc. Hack target is not always dive target. That part's true. Every hero can be dove. Every hero can be dove, but the size that the mistake has to be for you to be willing to dive them differs. Yeah. Like, if if you're playing versus poke, for example, on Anubis, and you're dive and their poke, and their Orisa drops off the high ground because they put, the split high ground on first point, and the Orisa drops to high ground while she still has Fortify, you're probably not going to dive her to try to force Fortify. You're probably just going to go, yeah, I don't care. Like, you're still not a target. We're going to go somewhere else. So if Fortify's out and she's alone on point, maybe. But, okay. Support has less support for a dive than a DPS. Supports can heal a DPS being dove, whereas only one support can heal if the other support is being dove. Okay. Because supports don't self-heal very well. Sure. Sure, I can live with that. That doesn't matter a huge amount to me. Like if there's an off-angling Widow, I probably need to dive it regardless. If there's a Hanzo that's gone aggressive, he's probably alone because they'll do that sort of thing. Probably need to go after him. Soldiers will frequently be alone. Probably am going to push that out. So it depends. But I see what you're saying. You're trying to go. I see what you're trying to math there. Yeah. Hack David to dive Zen as an example of Hack not being the dive target. Sure. Poke from flanks and off angles. Value, trade for safe. Value, trade for safe. Okay. Um, we explained this. We said that we wanted to. They don't peel well. We explained sort of how they do what they do instead. You've said you want to prioritize diving supports rather than DPS. Sometimes that makes sense. Depends on a lot of things. Depends on a lot of things. For okay, okay, that's fine. Let's move on to the mirror then. First dive advantage. Second dive has to either counter dive or peel. So it sucks. It sucks. I wish the terminology hadn't evolved like this, but it did. Counter dive and peel are the same thing. It's unfortunate. I would really like it if what counter dive meant was Team A dives you first with an alpha dive, so you counter dive and go after their backline and base race. I would really like that to be what it means. It's not what it means. What counter dive has evolved to mean is team dives you, your flankers are out here, and you dive back on top of their tanks and divers to peel them. That's what counter dive means. So counter dive or peel are actually the same thing. I'm not the boss. I didn't make the rule. I would have liked that terminology to be used differently, but I did not win that terminology battle. And counter dive to the scene means doing a peel dive. I would have preferred peel dive be what it was called, but it's not. Both teams play flanks. DPS 1v1's likely. Yes. Different variations. 2 dives, 4 peel, 3 dive, 3 peel, 6 dive, 0 peel, Lucian Moira backline, sure. High mobility equals no perfect opportunity. Proactive dive into enemy backlines. I mean, it's a pretty perfect opportunity if you hack someone. Just saying, just saying. But yes, yes. Okay. First dive has advantage. I'm not even sure I'd go with that first dive has an advantage thing because, especially if we're not playing true dive v drive, we're instead playing poke dives versus each other. If one team's poke is just winning, that can pressure the other team into just forcing a dive before they lose harder, especially if they're playing full dive. If they're playing like Winston Genji Tracer and you're playing Soldier Ball, you have better poke than them. They know that they're just going to lose over time, and if they start to lose, they may just try and force a dive, and it'll be bad, and you're going to win type thing. So I'm not really sure I'm with that either. Again, this is one of those things where that might be like technically true if anyone was playing full dive v full dive, but even then, I'm not really convinced I agree with that. Genji can peel tanks just fine as long as he's not being focused. Yeah, I'm not really going to go with that. And even if I did, no one's playing full dive v full dive anymore. Okay. And yes, I consider Tracer Sombra, if they have a brig, not to be full dive. If you ran Tracer Sombra without a brig, I suppose you would be running full dive, but yeah. Versus Brawl weak, surround from all angles, force out CDs before dive, isolate target with soft dive, defensive dive without commitment. Surround from all angles, good. Force out CDs before dive, good. Isolate target with soft dives, maybe. Maybe. Probably not. Probably surround, force out. You could say isolate targets with soft dives if you're using like Hammond to do it. That could be what you mean. Winston's not going to do very much soft diving of Brawl. He just won't get out alive. Like he can in a double bubble situation sometimes. I'd really focus more on like the first two than the third here. Defensive dive without commitment. I'd call them not very soft dives if you're going for dives there. Retreat quick, don't hold space. I want to hold my ankles, but yes, if they as a group push anything, you leave and you readjust. Bait abilities, opportunity to commit, create opportunities with abilities or ultimate, hacknade primal, sure. And then we move on to spam. Okay. How are we doing here? Fine. Spam versus Brawl. It's strong, split up, maximize value against Brawl, can't block from multiple directions. Spam versus Brawl. Split up, maximize value against Brawl, can't block from multiple directions. They can, but can't do it for as long. Flank value, safety is a trade. So no, not really. Flank value versus safety isn't really a trade. Like that's not how poke works. Poke doesn't protect itself. Like Ashe does not protect Hanzo well by standing right next to Hanzo. Ashe protects Hanzo well by actually being separated from Hanzo, where she can, if Hanzo's dove, she's not being pestered and she can calmly shoot at whatever dove Hanzo. So no, I disagree. Spam needs map control to maximize angles. It does. Avoid shooting shields. Find angles to shoot behind shields. Sure, generally fine advice. Projectiles closer equals higher DPS, less safe because of accuracy. I mean, okay, probably not worth including. Sweet spot, maximize safety and DPS, probably not worth including. Higher mobility, closer you're able to play. Sure. So the concept there, someone like Ashe or Soldier can play closer to the opponent than someone like McCree. Sort of true, except McCree has flash. So, okay. 3 lanes. Ooh, we're getting into the lane discussion. It's more of a spectrum. Do you want to get a harder flank more? Or do you value losing safety? Right, but like it's kind of an illusion because we've got to solve the team fight. We've got to win the team fight, and like I'm safer, but my team is going to get rolled because I'm not protecting them well enough by being separated. And you're going to get rolled if you're standing on your team when the brawl comp gets to you or when the dive comp gets to you because the Winston bubble's just going to mess everything up. The pile drive's going to hit everyone. The Tesla's going to get everyone. That sort of thing. The pulse bomb's going to get 3 people. 3 lanes. I wanted to see your lane discussion. Okay. Top, mid, bot, in law. In lull, okay. Left, mid, right, sure. Control all 3 angles, maximize DPS. Sometimes there's more than 3 lanes, but generally Overwatch maps work for 3 lanes, yeah. Each lane supports each other, mostly true. Healing, peeling damage. Everyone needs to be in line of sight of each other as much as possible. And when you actually create the elimination box, when you actually pull the trigger on the dive, yes, everyone needs to be able to see each other when that happens at the place that it happens. For some of the staging, for some of the lane battles, that's just not going to be possible. And you don't want to totally surrender a lane just because you can't see it. If you start to lose a lane that's in a closed space that you can't support, you can start to pull a little bit back towards the edge of that lane where it can be supported by your Zen, by your Brig, by crossfire from your Echo, that sort of thing, cross lane fire. But you are going to have to win some lanes or battle for some lanes to stop people from getting in through them that, your team can't support very well, at which place you might play them shallow, but you still play them. Or if it's not being contested, you play it deep and you're ready to go on their team. This team rotates, counter-rotates around to keep them distance and maintain lanes. Rotate CDs as well. Do not use them all at once. Okay, this is cool, but why am I talking about this in Spam versus Brawl? Like, Spam can take 3 lanes. Spam can take 3 lanes. It's probably known for taking 2 lanes. It probably should take 3 lanes more often. Everyone needs to be in line of sight of each other. Yeah, this is more true for poke things. They all need to be in line of sight of each other. Yeah, that's more true. So this line makes sense since we're putting this in the poke category. Lanes, rotate CDs as well. Do not use it all at once. No, you actually do tend to go pretty heavy with a cooldown cycle where you go pretty heavy on your investment with your cooldowns. You want to go, hey, you don't have a ton of cooldowns to use as a poke comp, but you do go pretty heavy at like, hey, we're pretty willing to spill fresh Orisa Shield, Halt, TNT, Stickies all at once. And that's kind of all we have in terms of offensive cooldowns. We have more defensive cooldowns like Coach Weapon and Fortify and Sigma Hands, but we couldn't really pour those as more offensive ability into that. Contest payloads with abilities, mobility, monkey on point, jump to get out, diva boosters. Again, if we're including this, we're talking about a hybrid if we have a monkey in our poke comp. And if we're talking about hybrids, some of the other stuff we've said about some of these is really concerningly wrong, like Brawl into dive. Contest payload, we talked about that. Versus spam mirror, push with advantage, 6 players against left or right lane to control that lane. No, you're going to get crushed. If you try to push 6 players, do I have a map pulled up that makes sense for this? Okay. Let's pretend this is a poke comp. Bear with me. Let me get another poke hero. I've got Echo. Let me get another poke hero, Hanzo. If you try to push 6 people down mid, let's pretend this is a poke comp, to try to take this lane, you're just going to get crushed by the other 2 lanes. If you try to spend 6 people down this lane, they're just going to counter rotate. And now you haven't really accomplished anything. So you can't really go, let's just run 6 down to try to brawl them, unless you can do something like catch someone inside, or you have speed and they don't. But if you have speed, that's unusual for your poke comp to have speed, to be perfectly honest. I wrote this out chronologically with Thor's video, and 3 lanes were discussed in Spam vs. Brawl at length. Okay, that's fine. I'm still telling you that my view would be that this lane thing probably fits harder in dive. That said, I know Thor likes, again, I know Thor, I've spoken with Thor. I know Thor likes his poke metas, and he might think of it more there in terms of, oh, hey, this is more where I'm thinking of it. He also might be thinking heavily about the poke dive hybrid when he's thinking about poke, and that's fine. You can think about your poke dive hybrid, but I'd probably consider that more dive. Maybe he's considering it more poke. It's a hybrid. It doesn't really matter. But even like right now, if you're using a more divier version of it, which would be Sombra Tracer, and your only real hybrid piece would be your Brig, I suppose. Well, I suppose you've got your Brig and your Sigma, depending on what you're running. I'd still think pretty hard about those lanes. I could see why you'd want to put it in poke over dive. Dive wraps the lanes around and turns them into angles to do that. Poke really likes it as well. It really fits pretty well for both of them. It fits pretty well for both of them. I still don't like this 6 players push 1 as poke. Like that's not amazing. If the other team knows what they're doing, it should get punished. Push with advantage, 6 players again. Oh, against left or right lane to control the lane. That's better. That's better. Okay, if we're specifically calling out that it's left or right lane, that is better because the other team is going to be slow to rotate because it's slow. Okay, that is much better. I'm objecting over nothing. And the reason that that's better is it's going to be slow if you're. It's going to be somewhat slow if you're pushing this left or right lane. For these guys, this Hanzo, for example, to adjust over here. In this case, it's not because he can cheat. He's Hanzo, whatever. But generally, teams would be slow to rotate to take back your spawn lane there. Okay, that makes more sense. One group pushes, then step 2, split into 2 groups. One group pushes other group, stays to keep lane control. As long as your lane can threaten the lane they're pushing into, sure. Step 3, split into 3 groups. One group for each lane/angle. Push with advantage. Okay. Yeah, I can live with that. 2 groups to hold space and support the one group that is moving. Whatever lane is pushing needs support in that lane. Cross lane support, yep. Lanes without support can't push as they have no healing, hold space. Hold space. You can't push if you don't have support. Okay. It's probably a little different than how I'd coach it, but it's pretty solid. Okay, cool. Burst dive weak, put maximum distance between you and the enemy, harder to dive, sort of. It's mostly true, but it's more important that you don't let them get control of lanes, don't get us around. So it's not all about distance, but distance helps. Tanks want to solo control lanes for spam till in line of sight of DPS support. Tanks want to solo control lanes for spam, still in line. Oh, still in line of sight of DPS and support. Okay. Right, you're less worried about your tanks getting dove, or you're less worried about your Orisa getting dove, I suppose. No sustain, easiest to peel for, sure. Bait dive onto tanks, exposes dive to spam, with tanks having defensive mobility, abilities to survive. Sigma's not that safe against dives. He can fight a flanker pretty well. He's not that safe against dives, even if his team has line of sight of him. Okay. Bait dive onto tanks, expose dive to spam, with tanks having defensive mobility abilities to survive. When dive happens, keep the rest of team occupied. Less resources given to dive. When dive happens, keep the rest of team occupied. Right. You want your core to engage their core so that their front line isn't supported as well. That's a good Overwatch concept. Focus tanks, no space to dive. Focus divers. If you're playing against tanks will work. But generally speaking, if you're a poke comp or if you have better poke, say you're a poke comp or a poke dive hybrid and you're up against a dive comp or a dive poke hybrid, if you're better at poke than the other comp is, you generally don't go, oh, we're putting all of our poke into trying to eliminate your backline or trying to eliminate your pokers. What you're actually interested in doing is applying poke pressure to the other team's divers, be they tanks or dive DPS, to slow down their staging. Because the more you can slow down the staging, the more you can make the staging difficult, the longer it's going to take them, and the more time you're going to have to poke. And if you have longer to poke, you're more likely to get an elimination. So that's probably what's meant here. Yeah, but I wouldn't put attack tank specifically because shooting at Tracer is more important than shooting at Sigma, for example, in a hybrid matchup. If you're the pokier team. Hybrid compositions. How much do we have left here? 2 pages? Okay. Getting a little long, guys. I know. Apologize. Stay with me as best you can, or don't. Up to you. If you are enjoying this type of content, though, please do drop a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you have questions, you can throw them up in chat because I am between sections here and I would answer some questions. Otherwise, I'm going to continue on through. Hybrid compositions. Combination between 2 rock, paper, scissors comps. Tank strength and weaknesses from both comps. Less impressive than either, but less extreme as well. I mean, I think most poke dive hybrids are just better than full dive comps these days. So I'm not sure I agree with that. I think McCree Brawl or Hanzo Brawl comp is just better in most situations than a Reaper May Brawl. So I'm not sure I agree. Okay. 2 possible win conditions, making it very versatile. Really more than 2 possible win conditions, but yes. I understand what's meant. How to play against it. Identify the part your comp is weak against. Play as you would against the full composition. Fairly good advice. Brawl dive. Weak against... Okay, Brawl dive. Weakest against Brawl. Dive strong against spam. Brawl weak against spam. Strong versus dive. Brawl dive is weakest against Brawl. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, got it. Dive spam, strongest versus spam. Dive weak versus brawl. Spam strong versus brawl. Okay, weakest against dive. Yeah. And then spam brawl, strongest versus brawl. Weakest versus spam. spam weak versus dive, brawl strong versus dive. Yeah, okay, we followed the logic there. Okay, example, playing spam brawl against dive spam. Both teams spam until you brawl. When the dive happens, sustain through it. Okay, sure. Transition comps. Keep heroes with impactful ultimates. Blizzard, Supercharger, etc. Why? Don't lose ult advantage. There's a lot of back and forth on that. Being on comps that your team doesn't understand the win condition for because your comp is broken can hurt you a lot. But I don't have a strong objection to it. It's not like conceptually wrong necessarily. In practice, is your team better trying to execute an ult win condition, or is your team better understanding how their comp's neutral works? The ideal scenario would be, oh, we understand how our win condition works when we have a broken comp, but do they really? Like, players aren't coaches. They don't necessarily immediately jump to that against the thing like, you're good at what you practice. You're a lot better at what you practice. But I don't have a strong disagreement with this. I'll let it go. Different coaches have reasonably different opinions here. Build up ultimates with new comp by using old comps as early as possible in the next fight. Yeah, that's right. And sometimes you practice specifically to cycle out with ults. Like cycles between quad DPS and Sombra Goats was something that, well, people should know how to play Sombra Goats back in the day because that's something that, was a mainstream composition. So keeping your EMP if you were on a quad DPS comp as you rotated into Goats, well, that makes sense because you know how to play Sombra Goats. Okay, tempo. Last page, tempo. When to play fast, slow, or fast, 50% on composition, 50% on mid-fight situation. Dev comps, take time to prepare slow, but actual fight is fast. Sure. If you're truly a full dive comp and you're just going to dive once you've established your angles, that's true. If you're playing dive versus brawl, though, or if you're playing dive with a little bit of poke in you versus brawl, you're probably going to sustain your angles and cook them a bit, get some cooldowns out, that sort of thing. Or you're going to take multiple soft dives like we talked about, and okay, maybe those are fast, but it's sort of like an ongoing fast, slow type thing. Like, Spam comps. Consistent efficiency, longer fights, more damage as slow as possible. Sure. Effective range of comps, how long you can play, how long you can stay in it. Dive spends little time in effective range, plays fast. Spam spends long time in effective range, plays slow. Okay, that's one way to think about it. How long you get to spend in your effective range also depends on the opposing team, but okay. Based on heroes, based on abilities, which have CDs, your abilities on CD play slower, their abilities on CD play faster. Sure, if we're going with the fast and slow dichotomy. Some of this is more what is your effective distance than your effective speed, and you'd like to fight at your comp's effective distance. So like when people say play slow when Poke doesn't mind if it wins the fight really quickly. If Poke can play and hey, Widow just got 6 headshots in 5 seconds, cool, we're good. We're happy to play fast. Like it's not really slow, it's more about playing in your effective range, and you'd like the fight to stay in your effective range for the right amount of time. You might say, no, dive breaks that, but not really, because if I pull a nice surround with dive on the opposing composition, let's say this is here, and I'm trying to pull, Zen's playing at their effective range, which is far away, but Tracer is playing somewhat close, even if she's staying somewhat close. She's not staying in their effective range, but she's staying somewhat close. It's a little out of her effective range, but she's sustaining this, or she's sustaining this to try to keep applying pressure, and Sombra, if I have one, is doing much the same thing. Like, we're actually just trying to stay in a range that's more effective for us than them, if that's what we're doing. So, or in a range that's effective enough for us while having angles, which allows us to wear them down better because angles are a buff to poke damage, to damage in general, really. But I can live with the fast for slow. I know some people who hate it, but I can live with the fast for slow things. The faster team gets the better position, which gives them tempo control. Sort of. Didn't we get the walkthrough here of how to get the better position with your slow team with poke. Okay. Identify right place mid-fight. Very complex. Goat's comp, highly intricate, requires perfect info on which CD used, good communication. That's every comp. Every comp is actually highly complicated. If we stay on it long enough, we get better and better at it, and we get more and more into, okay, what do the cooldown trades look like? What do the angles look like? Is it better to have your McCree late peak or to stack him with team? Well, how does it change based on if the enemy team has Doomfist? Is it better to have your Diva on the off angle contesting the Doomfist early and put your McCree back with your team? Or is it better to have your Diva back with the team ready to peel the Doomfist little right-click shots and have your McCree off angling? Okay, well, what about having ults? How does that change? Like, everything gets really, really complex when we go long on it because there's just that many interactions in the game. But overall, this was interesting. There's some things in here that I'd be worried about. Some things that aren't strictly wrong, but like some of the dive versus brawl stuff that's not strictly wrong. But the reality is no one plays the full dive version, so it's kind of dangerous information in the sense, not like, oh, it's dangerous, it has to be censored, people can't see it, but like it would lead people to the wrong conclusion most likely because it's not clear enough. And that's probably something you want to avoid because we're in a situation where again, no one's playing full dive. That sort of thing. So there's some things in here I'd recommend adjusting. I'm not going to do like a rehash of everything in here. I think we went through this at a plenty slow enough pace. If people are curious, they can jump to the individual sections in the video to see what we thought. But overall, conceptually, this is reasonably good. I can see Thor's influence in here. That's fine. Thor knows what he's talking about. Pretty solid in here. I definitely had places I objected to. Some stuff is just, coach's opinion in terms of, okay, do we want to use the fast versus slow concept? Do we want to use the enabler versus finisher ults? I'm less a fan of enabler versus finisher than I am of fast versus slow, but there are some things in here also which I would consider just wrong. And I'd recommend you go address those, as well as you go really light on your poke original phase, but then when we get to sort of the matchups, you go pretty hard into, okay, how does poke play into all these things? And that's a little bit of a weird decision considering how you laid out the rest of the guide. But that was interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed us reviewing someone's guide like this. If you enjoy this type of content or have other things you'd like me to review, I'm potentially interested in doing so. Go ahead and join the Discord in the description below, and in there you can see when I'm live reacting to these sort of things, reviewing them, that sort of thing. So you can ask questions, say, wait, no, I don't think that's right. Temporal, can you explain that better? That sort of thing. As well as you can in the Discord post things that you would potentially be interested in me taking a look at and the like. So hop into Discord if you haven't. Drop a like and subscribe if you're enjoying this type of content. If you guys have any final questions, throw them up now. And other than that, I think we're going to wrap up if I don't see any questions in the next 30 seconds or so. Sounds like that'll do it.